Welcome to the fantasy audiobook. Marvel. I inherited the kingdom of shadows. Chapter 61. Black clouds are pressing down on the city, and the city is about to be destroyed. Under the shroud of black clouds and thunder, the entire New York City became extremely depressing. Countless citizens were terrified and looked at the sky in horror, thinking that the end was about to come. Saul and Loki turned their heads to look at Tony in the distance at the same time, and Tony was describing the narration with great emotion. Seeing Saul and the two of them staring at him, Tony couldn't help but stop, and coughed lightly. "Can't help it, you guys continue, now you are the protagonists, just pretend that I don't exist." After explaining something, Tony shut his mouth, and Saul and Loki didn't bother to care about it. After all, as gods, neither of them looked down on Tony, a mortal, even if this mortal behaved a little unusually. "Just destroy all your incarnations, and I'll see where you run." Thor looked confident, and instantly raised the Thor's hammer in his hand, and a thunderbolt pierced through the dark clouds, leading the thunder down. Fall. In an instant, countless dazzling thunderbolts fell from the sky, instantly turning the sky above New City into an ocean of thunderstorms. For a moment, the entire world was reflected into a vast expanse of whiteness. However, all this is just the scene in Thor's eyes. In Tony's eyes at this moment, Loki held up the scepter, and the gemstone inlaid on the top of the scepter was shining with white light. The thunderbolts falling from the sky are rushing towards the top floor of Times Square under the guidance of Saul. There, a radiation device as high as more than 10 meters is standing on the spot. The power of thunder is poured into the radiation device under the guidance of Thor to help recharge. Watching this scene, Tony's emotional voice sounded again. The hero thinks he has saved the world, but he doesn't know that he is becoming an accomplice of the devil. His power is quoted by the devil, gradually pushing the world to hell. Hearing this, Loki, who was the only listener, couldn't help laughing. Soon, another Loki appeared next to Tony, looking at him curiously. "You don't seem to be in a hurry." "Why should I be in a hurry? I just came to see the play." Tony stopped reading the narration, and asked with a strange face. "I plan to call an army to rule the earth, you know. If you don't stop me, I will soon be able to open the door of time and space and summon the army to descend." Loki talked about his plan, and looked at Tony curiously, wanting to see Tony's reaction. Because of Tony's performance, he was curious, so he directly revealed his plan, really a confident god. However, Tony's performance once again exceeded Rocky's expectations. "Does it matter to me who rules the world? Also, if you think the world can be ruled by you so easily, why doesn't the person behind you come in person?" After the words fell, Loki's complexion changed. This was the first time his complexion changed. Since coming to Earth, he has been very graceful and calm. But now listening to Tony's words, he suddenly couldn't calm down. "You know who's behind me? It's just a piece of purple sweet potato." Puff. Loki, who had become serious just now, couldn't help laughing when he heard this. Purple sweet potatoes. Thinking about the image of that person, he suddenly felt that this description was very appropriate. "You are so courageous that you dare to comment on a supreme being like this. However, I'm curious, what do you mean by what you just said? Isn't this world very simple? But since I came, it seems that I haven't found any strong people." Perhaps because of the evaluation just now, Loki's attitude at the moment does not have that sense of superiority, but is like two old friends chatting. And Tony also found that this Loki seems to be different from the one shown in the movie, so he doesn't mind chatting with him. "As far as I know, there is also a supreme living on this planet, and there is another supreme born on this planet in the universe." Tony didn't make it too clear, but for a smart person like Loki, this information is enough. "So that's it. In this way, I became cannon fodder." Speaking of this, Loki shook his head with a smile, and Tony raised his eyebrows strangely at his reaction. "Aren't you angry? Why are you angry?" "I'm not strong enough, so naturally I have to obey the arrangement, otherwise, I'm afraid I'll die before I reach Earth," Loki said calmly. It is said that Tony really appreciates this guy at this moment. Not because of the guy's demeanor, but because of the truth he showed. The true arrogance, the true regard of all beings as ants, the true acceptance of the fact that he is cannon fodder. Tony saw no reluctance in it. This also made Tony realize more deeply that this is a real world, not a movie or a comic. Everyone has flesh and blood, not a character set by the screenwriter. The characters and plots from the previous life can only be used as a reference. Whoever regards those things as the future destiny of this world will really become a shabby. What's more, the butterfly of fate can change the direction of a world with a flick of its wings. Now Tony has changed all the plots beyond recognition. Those so-called plots have long lost their value. Withdrawing his thoughts, Loki's words rang in Tony's ears at this moment. Since you don't stop me, I'll get busy first and chat with you when I have a chance. No problem, you are busy with your work. If you can't get along, you can come to me and I will take you in. With that said, Tony popped out a business card, then turned and left the place. Looking at the back of Tony leaving, Loki looked down at the business card in his hand and couldn't help but smile. Pong! A flame burned in his hand, and the business card was directly reduced to ashes. An inexplicable fluctuation instantly spread throughout Niau, and everyone felt a burst of sonic shock. Inside S.H.I.E.L.D., all senior executives of S.H.I.E.L.D. are watching the projection screen of Time's building in the conference room. In the picture, Saul controls the thunder to continuously pour into the radiation device, and under the guidance of the radiation device, this power is directly integrated into the Rubik's Cube embedded in it, successfully activating the cosmic Rubik's Cube. Suddenly, a vast spatial fluctuation caused the surrounding space to vibrate, and a gate of time and space hundreds of meters high was gradually appearing above the sky. Seeing this scene, the faces of Nick and others became extremely ugly, and Nick immediately said in a deep voice, "Have you seen that portal? Can anyone tell me what that thing is for?" After saying that, the S.H.I.E.L.D. scientist who specialized in the study of the cosmic Rubik's Cube stood up immediately and said solemnly, "The cosmic Rubik's Cube contains vast power, which can open the door of space and transmit a large amount of weapon resources over long distances. That door should be the door of space opened by the cosmic Rubik's Cube. When the portal is opened, something may be transmitted, or it may be an alien." The scientist of the S.H.I.E.L.D. Bureau spoke in a serious tone, his face full of dignity, and suddenly, the atmosphere in the meeting room became oppressive. After a long time, finally, Nick got up and looked at the crowd and said, "Everyone, the time of life and death has come. Prepare for the battle. No matter what the hell comes out of that door, we must beat them back. Jack, you contact the military and ask them to mobilize large troops into the city and set up defense lines around them. You must not let anything break through the blockade." "Yes, Chief." "Wells, contact the government and ask them to organize the evacuation of all residents within 10 kilometers. In addition, people 10 kilometers away should be ready to evacuate at any time, and consider using weapons of mass destruction in case of any unexpected situation." As soon as these words came out, everyone present was stunned for a moment, and looked at Nick in disbelief, as if they couldn't believe that these words came out of his mouth. Wells, who was named by Nick, got up instantly and said, "Director, this is a girl, should we ask for instructions first?" "Don't worry, I will make a report to Congress later, you should prepare now. Even if the responsibility comes down later, I will bear it. Take action." Yes, everyone agreed. Nick had already talked about this point, so it was difficult for them to refute. After everyone walked out of the meeting room, Nick stopped Steve and the others. "Everyone, now I would like to trouble you to go all the way and bring Saul back. Also, you can try to see if you can destroy that device. If it can't be destroyed, then withdraw it first, and we will find a way." After finishing speaking, Nick bowed to everyone, and said solemnly, "This incident concerns about tens of millions of people, and the safety of hundreds of millions of people in the United States. Please do your best, please." Everyone felt determination from Nick, especially Eddie. He is a person full of justice, otherwise he would not have ventured into the Life Foundation to uncover the truth about human experiments. At that moment, Eddie said loudly, "Don't worry, Director, leave it to us." Steve also stepped forward to help Nick at this moment and said, "Don't forget, I am a hero of the United States. Saving the world is what I am best at." Steve made a rare joke, and a smile appeared on Nick's face. At the moment, everyone left one after another, and Nick also began to contact his superiors. Under the leadership of S.H.I.E.L.D., various departments in the United States began to act quickly. Teams of soldiers and tanks and chariots drove into Neo to build a blockade. With the Times building as the center and within a radius of 10 kilometers, all residents began to evacuate under the organization of the U.S. government. Naturally, some resistance was encountered in the middle, but they were all suppressed by S.H.I.E.L.D. At this critical juncture, no matter who stands in the way, S.H.I.E.L.D. will not be polite. Luo Ji watched this scene on the roof of the Times building. His eyes were extremely calm, and he didn't stop him at all, let alone intervene. As proud as he is, he doesn't bother to attack these mortals, as long as they don't stop him. At this time, Saul, who was immersed in fantasy, also woke up with a lot of divine power consumption. When he saw Loki standing not far away intact, with a huge space-time gate reflecting the sky, Saul's expression changed suddenly. Especially when he sensed that the launching device was filled with familiar energy, his expression became extremely ugly. What's going on? Saul asked in disbelief, what he had realized, but he didn't want to admit it. Hearing this, Loki didn't hide anything at all, and told everything. It didn't start so quickly, but I still have to thank you, my dear brother. Your divine power has become the power to drive the Rubik's Cube, and the effect is better than I imagined. Did you see that space-time door? You opened it for me yourself. Hearing this, Saul's body suddenly shook slightly, his face pale. It's not that he was scared, it's just that his divine power was consumed severely, which made him weak. However, Loki's words also made him feel stuffy. He turned out to be an accomplice. How can this be? He is a little hard to accept. He is Thor, god of war of the 9 realms, and now he has become Loki's accomplice, which is really unacceptable to him. But no matter whether he accepts it or not, the matter has become a foregone conclusion. He can only watch it fixedly, nothing can be changed at all. Just then, Steve and the others arrived. Call out. There was a sound of breaking through the air, and Steve threw the shield in his hand forcefully, and smashed it at Loki with a howling sound. Snapped. Loki's body was directly smashed, blood spattered, and the body fell to the ground. Seeing this, Banner and the others, who were just about to make a move, were stunned. Is this the enemy they regard as their archenemy? Is that resolved? Even Steve, the instigator, couldn't believe it. He couldn't help but looked at his hands and said, when did I become so strong? Just when everyone was surprised, Thornton, who knew the truth, roared loudly. That's fake, don't be fooled by him. After the words fell, Rocky's figure appeared beside Steve, and he swung the scepter in his hand vigorously, smashing it towards his face. Steve narrowed his pupils and quickly put his hands in front of his face. But soon he discovered that something was wrong. There was no so-called attack at all except for a gust of wind. Fake. After saying something to himself, another Loki appeared beside him, swinging the scepter again and hitting him. He blocked again, and the result was still fake. In just a short moment, Rocky shot 7 or 8 times, but each time it turned out to be false. This made Steve completely relax his vigilance, and he didn't even bother to move when facing Loki's attack again. As a result, bang! A dull sound sounded, and Steve's figure was thrown flying by Loki's scepter. Looking at this scene, everyone except Saul was stunned. Can't understand what's going on here at all. Seeing this, Saul, who was weak at the side, explained helplessly, Loki is the god of lies and deceit. He is good at illusion and can already make falsehoods come true. All his actions may be true or false. Hearing this, the corners of everyone's eyes twitched, and some didn't know what to say. But they were stunned, but Loki didn't. Soon, a large number of Loki appeared around them and attacked them. Everyone dodged and tried to block, but they were all fake. But once they let down their vigilance, the attack became real, and everyone was tortured so much that they couldn't die. True or false, how to fight this? Soon, everyone except Banner fell to the ground. Only Banner, who turned into green and fat, acted as Rocky's sandbag with his strong defense. Seeing that everyone in S.H.I.E.L.D. was about to collapse in front of Loki, suddenly there was a burst of violent gunfire. Many soldiers surrounding here fired one after another, and the bullets formed a rain curtain and poured towards Loki. Looking at this scene, Loki frowned, but quickly dodged away. Naturally, mortal weapons couldn't harm him, but he was so proud that he absolutely didn't want mortal weapons to fall on him, so he chose to avoid it. And his dodging immediately created an opportunity for Steve and others to retreat. At that moment, Steve shouted, "Retreat. Take Saul, let's go." After speaking, he and Eddie came to Saul at the same time, lifted him who had lost his strength and fled quickly. Banner and Flint didn't stay any longer, and quickly began to retreat. Soon, the group of people was out of Loki's sight. Seeing this, Loki didn't chase after him, but just calmly looked at the direction in which everyone was fleeing, not knowing what he was thinking. Inside S.H.I.E.L.D., seeing the people leaving, Nick was suddenly relieved. Although he didn't come to the scene in person, he witnessed the whole process of the battle between Steve and Rocky through the satellite. How should I put it, it made him a little disappointed. The crowd he had placed high hopes on fell apart in front of Loki. Although Loki's abilities are very weird, this is no excuse. For a moment, he couldn't help but feel a little confused. Can people like them really stop Loki? Before the battle, this question would put a question mark in his heart, but now there is no question mark, only deep despair. Because he sees no hope of victory. As for the use of weapons of mass destruction, this is only a last resort. If possible, he doesn't want to go to this point. After all, this is New York. Once weapons of mass destruction are used, the impact will be too great. Even the White House will be affected. But besides this method, is there any other way? Nick kept thinking in his mind, and suddenly Tony's figure broke into his mind. If it's him, there should be hope. Nick thought with some uncertainty, but a glimmer of hope suddenly appeared in his originally desperate heart. Although he was a little reluctant to admit it, he knew that Tony was the most mysterious and powerful transcendent he had ever seen. Others may have no hope of meeting Loki, but if he does, there is a high probability that he will win. This is not Nick's random guess, but the confidence built up after being abused by Tony for so long. But here comes the question, how to get Tony involved in this incident. In the name of righteousness. As soon as this idea came to mind, Nick shook his head. Maybe you can use righteousness for others, but for Tony, forget it. This guy is completely self-interested, he doesn't have enough interests, and it's just a dream to ask him to help. Seeing that the newly found dawn was about to go out, suddenly, a person appeared in Nick's mind again. Natasha. He remembered that Natasha was sent to Stark undercover by his predecessor, and he didn't know what was going on now. With inexplicable expectations, Nick called Natasha. "Hey, Chief." Natasha was a little surprised, not knowing why Nick called herself suddenly. Although he has been undercover, she still knows what is going on in S.H.I.E.L.D. "Ahem, how is your relationship with Tony?" Nick asked in embarrassment, feeling inexplicably ashamed. Natasha was directly confused by this question, is it related? What relationship? Although her head was a little dizzy, fortunately she didn't forget Nick on the other end of the phone, hesitated for a while, and said with some uncertainty, it should be, not bad. After finishing speaking, Natasha couldn't help but see a restricted level image in her mind, and a blush appeared above her neck. Hearing this answer, Nick couldn't help but heaved a sigh of relief. As long as it matters, I'm afraid it doesn't matter. I have a task for you now. I want to ask Tony to help deal with a person. You can use any means to get him to agree. Nick said in a serious tone, but in fact, the embarrassment in his heart was almost uncontrollable. This is the first time he has let his subordinates use this kind of thing to achieve a certain purpose. But as the saying goes, as long as you are not embarrassed, then others are the ones who are embarrassed. Therefore, even if you feel uncomfortable in your heart, you don't show the slightest on the surface. Director, I don't promise to complete the task. Natasha couldn't believe it. In fact, she couldn't feel confident either. The relationship between her and Tony had always been dominated by Tony, and she wasn't sure how much weight she had in Tony's heart. It's okay, do your best, and make sure he agrees. The fate of all New York is now in your hands. After speaking, Nick hung up the phone without waiting for Natasha to reply. Sitting on the office chair and taking a deep breath for a while, Nick forced himself to forget the phone call just now and get back to work again. Stark Industries. Listening to the busy tone from the phone, Natasha put away the phone, but a look of helplessness appeared on her face. She also wanted to try her best, but Tony didn't come to the company at all. How could she try her best? Thinking helplessly, Natasha couldn't help but took out the phone again, found Tony's number, hesitated for a moment, and dialed it directly. Potts residence. Tony, who was wondering where to go, suddenly heard the phone ring. Picking up the phone and looking at the caller ID, Tony frowned. What's up? Tony, are you free tonight? Hearing this, Tony's mouth suddenly evoked an inexplicable smile, and he suddenly missed her lips. I'm free now, wait for me to pick you up. I'm still at work. Natasha was caught off guard by Tony, and said quickly. It's okay, I'll give you a holiday today, come down now, I'll be there soon. Tony said domineeringly. Without giving her a chance to refuse, he hung up the phone directly. After tidying up, Tony drove the sports car and left the community. 10 minutes later, Tony's car appeared near Stark Industries. Through the glass, Tony saw Natasha, who was waiting at the door at a glance. She was wearing a professional suit, her legs were wrapped in black silk, and there was a pair of black frames on the bridge of her nose, which made her look like an elite in the workplace. Squeak. With a sudden sound of braking, the car stopped in front of Natasha. Natasha opened the door and got into the car. With a smile on her face, she said, Mr. Tony, where are you taking me? How about a sausage, please? Laughing, Tony started the car. Strangely, Natasha, the co-pilot, could no longer be seen from the windshield. Time is always passing by inadvertently, and Tony took Natasha to fight landlords in the room all day. It wasn't until night fell that a refreshed Tony walked downstairs in his nightgown. The seaside villa is still being repaired, so here is another villa of Tony. The happiness of the rich is so simple and unpretentious. Sitting on the balcony with a glass of wine, watching the night scene outside, at this moment, Natasha walked down the stairs slowly. After taking a bath, she exudes amazing charm, but Tony, who entered the sage's time, completely ignored this charm. Tell me, what's the matter with me? Taking a sip of the wine in his glass, Tony didn't answer. Although he didn't have much contact with Natasha, he didn't believe it when he took the initiative to say that he didn't want to ask for something. However, for the sake of her hard work, Tony didn't mind giving her a chance. Natasha, who was thinking about how to speak, was stunned for a moment when she heard this, and then obediently sat beside Tony, lying on top of him like a kitten, and said, I'm fine, but Nick wants your help, let me ask you. Hearing this, the corners of Tony's mouth twitched slightly. What about Rocky? Then do you want my help? As long as you say yes, then I will help. Tony looked down at Natasha with a half smile. Suddenly, Natasha's heart skipped a beat, feeling a little nervous. Really? That's right, I'll keep my word. Tony promised. Natasha immediately wanted to speak, but before she could speak, she hesitated. A moment of silence. After a long time, Natasha shook her head with a complex expression. I only help spread the word, I don't care about the rest. Hearing this, a trace of surprise flashed in Tony's eyes. Oh, why? After the words fell, Natasha immediately reached out and touched Tony's cheek and said, You are very attractive, I don't want to turn our relationship into a transaction. Help spread the word, I have completed my duties, and the rest is not something I should consider. If it was just surprise just now, Tony is really surprised now. In his opinion, Natasha should do whatever it takes to complete the task, which is in line with her identity. But what she said just now completely overturned his impression of her. Is this falling in love with yourself? Tony thought uncertainly. But I have to say that her choice did win her favor. I have no shortage of women, if she just speaks, then she will just be a good trading partner in the future. As for the others, I'm sorry, let me know about it ruthlessly. I reached out and touched her long golden hair. I don't know what shampoo she used. The hair was extra soft and comfortable to the touch. You're smart, call Nick. It is good. Natasha nodded obediently, got up and took her mobile phone. Soon, the phone was dialed. With a beep, the phone was connected, and Nick's eager voice came from inside. Natasha, how is it? Did he agree? I'm Tony, Tony said on the phone. Suddenly, Nick on the other end of the phone fell silent. When he spoke again, his voice had become calm and unhurried, without feeling the urgency just now. Having dealt with Tony for a long time, Nick knew very well that he must not let Tony figure out his thoughts, otherwise, just wait for the bloodletting. This is the experience he exchanged with bloody lessons again and again. But Tony didn't have time to bargain with him today, so he said directly, You want me to help you deal with Loki? Yes, as long as you promise me one condition. What conditions? Natasha will quit S.H.I.E.L.D. in the future. Hearing this, Nick frowned suddenly. I don't make deals with my subordinates. Is it? Then what did you ask her to find me before? Tony sneered disdainfully. What he hated the most were people who set up archways after being a fool. Nick was no different from those people now. On the other end of the phone, Nick was also speechless by Tony, and didn't know what to say for a while. Okay, stop talking nonsense. It's rare that I'm in a good mood. On this condition, if you agree, the deal will be made, and if you don't agree, you will get out. Tony said impatiently. Suddenly, Nick's dull voice sounded, I respect Natasha's choice. That's it, hang up. After the words fell, Tony hung up the phone without hesitation, and then looked down at Natasha. From now on, just obediently help me manage the company. Remember to get along well with Potts. Ah, Natasha nodded. S.H.I.E.L.D., Nick sat on the office chair and rubbed his brows with a headache. He didn't expect things to turn out like this. Although he successfully invited Tony, he lost a capable man forever. Natasha's strength may not be strong, but her abilities are undoubtedly outstanding. For a moment, he didn't know whether what he did was right or wrong. Shaking his head and not thinking about it anymore, Nick got up and left the office, walking towards the meeting room. In the conference room, Steve and others sat in the conference room with a dejected face. Besides them, there was an old white man. He was the scientist who was in charge of studying the Rubik's Cube before, and because of his knowledge of the Rubik's Cube, he was also approved to participate in this meeting. Soon, the door of the conference room opened, and Nick stepped in. Looking at the listless crowd, he knocked on the table and said, Hey guys, we've got a tough problem ahead of us, cheers up. James, report on the situation of that space-time gate. To remind everyone, Nick looked directly at the old white man. Hearing this, James stood up and said, Director, after our calculations, the huge time-space gate will open at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning at the latest. We don't have much time now. Is there a way to turn it off before it turns on? Nick frowned. James shook his head helplessly. There is a way, but it's basically impossible. According to our research, it is possible to use powerful energy to impact the time-space gate. As long as the strength of the time-space gate cannot withstand the impact, the time-space gate can be forcibly closed. But the energy contained in the cosmic Rubik's Cube is too vast, and there is no such a large amount of energy to impact it. Is there anything else? Tell me something useful. Nick said impatiently that he needed a solution, not an impossible one. The last way left is to move the cosmic Rubik's Cube. As long as the cosmic Rubik's Cube is removed from the launching device, the time-space gate can also be closed. However, this could lead to an energy imbalance and a big bang. After all, that launcher is also full of energy. Hearing this, everyone couldn't help but glanced at Saul. After all, he instilled the energy in the launcher. Seeing that everyone was looking at him, Saul's face couldn't help turning dark, but he couldn't speak, so he could only pretend not to see. How much he looked down on everyone before, how embarrassing he is now. Confidently going to solve Loki, not only did not solve it, but also helped Loki, which made him feel unreasonable. Fortunately, at this time Nick opened his mouth and said, If there is a way, you will be responsible for getting the Rubik's Cube. Loki, I will find someone to deal with it. As soon as these words came out, Steve and the others looked up at Nick, their eyes full of puzzlement. You still have a backup? Saul directly asked the doubts in everyone's mind. Nick nodded. I contacted Tony, and he will make a move. As soon as these words came out, the expressions of Steve, Banner, Flint and others changed one after another. Saul was keenly aware that the atmosphere was not right. He originally wanted to ask who Tony was, but he just shut his mouth. Director, how can you find that guy? He is unreliable at all. Steve stood up directly to express his dissatisfaction. Although Banner didn't speak, he looked at Nick with the same gaze. Nick had expected this in his heart, but he had to say, otherwise, when Tony appeared, he was afraid that they would fight directly before Loki could win. Captain, calm down. I can't help it. The only one who can deal with Rocky now is Tony. If we don't look for him, what else can we do? Hearing this, although Steve agreed with Nick's words, he was still unwilling to say, that guy's strength is indeed unfathomable, but how do you know that he is sincerely cooperating with us, not playing tricks on us? Once he temporarily betrays the water, then it will be a real disaster. Besides, we just didn't understand Loki's ability, so we suffered a big loss. Let us try again. Even if we can't win Loki, we will definitely not be as embarrassed as we are today." After the words fell, Nick helplessly spread his hands. "Captain, do you know what it means for you to try? About tens of millions of people may suffer disaster just because you try it. And if you fail, I can only resort to the last resort, using weapons of mass destruction in New York. By that time, regardless of the economy, regardless of the impact, do you know how many people will die?" The two argued in the conference room, and the atmosphere became very tense. And as Nick continued to tell, Steve, who had originally spoken righteously, couldn't help but fell silent. "In short, this is the plan. Tomorrow you will be responsible for destroying the device, taking away the Rubik's Cube, and Loki will hand it over to Tony. Don't worry, although Tony is selfish, his reputation is still guaranteed. Since he promised to help, he won't turn his back on him. That's it, let's go." After speaking, Nick got up and wanted to leave. But at this time Eddie asked in a weak voice, "Boss, since you have a plan, why don't you act now?" Hearing this, Nick paused, left in a hurry and left without answering Eddie's question directly. If Tony can listen to him, he also wants to act now and solve this matter as soon as possible. But Tony didn't listen. Without Tony's cooperation, they acted like ghosts, so let's wait for tomorrow morning obediently. Time passed, and the night passed quickly. This night was destined to be unforgettable. The huge time-space gate hangs in the sky, and the citizens of the entire Niu city can see it as long as they look up. Countless people talked about it, and even stayed up all night. The scene above New York City has already spread all over the internet, rushing to the top of the topic list. In this way, the time came to 1:00 in the morning, all the residents around the Times building were evacuated and the military built a tight blockade. Nick, Steve and others have arrived here early, waiting for the action to start. But as time passed and Tony was still missing, Steve and the others couldn't help becoming anxious. "What's going on? Why hasn't that guy come yet? Boss, do we have to wait?" "Wait," Nick said calmly. Compared to the restlessness of the crowd, at this moment, he showed his demeanor as a general without any panic. It's not that he's really not in a hurry, but that he has already done what he can, and it's useless to be anxious, it's better to calm down. Finally, when the time came, Steve finally couldn't sit still, turned to look at Nick and said, "That guy must be playing tricks on us, he won't come at all, let me bring someone up, before the door of time and space is opened, let me take someone to gamble once." When Steve asked for a fight, Nick frowned, but his tone remained firm, "Keep waiting." After the words fell, many people's mentality almost exploded. But looking at Nick with a cold expression, everyone forcibly suppressed their irritability. Even though they usually quarrel with Nick, Nick's majesty as the director has always been well controlled. Once his face turned cold, Steve and others did not dare to blow their hair. Finally, at 8:00, a huge roar suddenly came from the sky. The sound waves spread in all directions, and the huge time-space gate began to ripple like water waves. The time-space gate was completely stable and could be opened. Seeing this scene, everyone ignored their depression and stared at the gate of time and space, waiting to see what would come out from behind the gate. Finally, a burst of light penetrated the sky and the earth, the time-space gate was completely opened, and a black starry sky appeared at the other end of the time-space gate. When everyone saw the scene behind the door through the time-space door, everyone couldn't help but gasp. In the vast starry sky, countless spaceships are connected together, occupying the vast starry sky. And on the ship, a soldier, wearing equipment completely different from that of the Earth's army, began to cross the gate of time and space and land on the Earth. Looking at them, everyone's face became serious. Their guess came true, there is really an army behind the gate of time and space. An alien army. Taking a deep breath, Nick forcibly suppressed the shock in his heart, and was about to give an order. At this moment, a sound of a sports car came from behind everyone. Nick and the others looked back subconsciously, and saw a silver-white supercar drifting, and stopped firmly behind everyone. Immediately, Tony, wearing sunglasses, walked over in a calm manner with his hands in his trouser pockets. Seeing this scene, Nick breathed a sigh of relief, while Steve exploded on the spot, rushing towards Tony angrily. Asshole! Boom! With a loud bang, Steve flew back upside down at a faster speed. But he was slapped back by Tony. Seeing this, everyone was stunned immediately, especially Banner, who originally wanted to explode, but now he just wanted to find a place to hide, so that Tony wouldn't see him. Slapping Steve away casually, Tony continued to walk towards the crowd calmly as if nothing had happened. Yo, it's all there. Why are you looking at me? Although I know I'm handsome, I'm not interested in men. Tony spoke lazily and casually, his eyes swept over everyone, and finally settled on Nick. The two looked at each other, and neither of them spoke. Tony walked past him and cast his eyes on the sky above the Times building. Looking at the spaceships in the vast starry sky through the time-space gate, Tony frowned, his eyes a little curious. It was the first time he saw aliens, no matter in his previous life or in this life, and he felt that they were no different from human beings. Of course, Loki and Saul don't count, they've seen each other before. Thinking in a mess, a black shadow appeared under his feet, and a night bat ninja appeared on Tony's way forward, letting Tony step on his back, and then carrying Tony soaring into the sky. The whole process is just 2 words, silky smooth, everything is as if it has been rehearsed, very smooth, giving people a full-bodied atmosphere. Everyone watched Tony's figure soar into the sky, and Nick finally said at this moment, "Okay, it's time for us to act. Everyone, the life and death of New York City is in your hands. Whether you can succeed this time is up to you," Nick said solemnly, and everyone's faces became serious, and they nodded solemnly. Even Steve, who was slapped away by Tony just now, didn't care about what happened just now. Compared with the life and death of tens of millions of people in New York, his being slapped by Tony is just a trivial matter. As a hero of the United States, Steve still knows the importance of this. At the moment, everyone also took action and moved towards the Times building. At this time, under the gate of time and space, as an alien soldier descended, he quickly organized a team and launched an attack on the surrounding American soldiers. And Steve and others who were going to the Times building also bumped into these alien soldiers, and the two sides collided immediately. Boom, boom, boom. Bursts of artillery fire roared, mixed with violent explosions resounding throughout New York. In order to stop the alien soldiers, the American soldiers who were armed to the teeth didn't care about the consumption of ammunition in their hands. Everyone poured ammunition crazily, as if they wanted to completely blast the Times building to the ground. Similarly, the descending alien soldiers were not to be outdone in the face of this scene, and the laser guns fired continuously, piercing through the American soldiers. Within a few minutes of the confrontation between the two sides, a large number of American soldiers were shattered by the laser guns. In contrast, the thermal weapons that human beings have always been proud of cannot break through the defensive battle suits on alien soldiers at all. The two sides are like the collision between modern civilization and ancient civilization, which comes from the crushing of technology, which completely puts the US soldiers at a disadvantage. Fortunately, there are superheroes on the US side who can share the pressure, so that the US soldiers will not be directly defeated. Flint controlled the yellow sand to run rampant among the crowd. He was immune to most physical damage. Although he could not completely isolate the damage caused by the laser, the damage was far from recovering quickly. So when he rushed into the alien soldiers, he directly turned into a killing god, ignoring the attacks of the alien soldiers, and manipulating the yellow sand to penetrate their bodies through the gaps in the defense devices. Banner is more direct, and his strong defense gives him the courage to run amok on the battlefield. Almost ignoring all the attacks, he was like a humanoid tank, raging wildly in the crowd, and a large number of alien soldiers were directly smashed into meatloaf under his huge strength. The defensive devices on their bodies were as fragile as paper to Banner, unable to defend against his attacks at all. Steve, the original American hero, also demonstrated strength that is not weaker than human beings. Holding the shield, he threw it out directly, like a boomerang, constantly shuttling through the crowd. Where the shield passed, a large number of alien soldiers were directly beheaded, and the scene was bloody and violent. Coupled with the fact that he accommodated the symbiote before, his physical fitness far surpassed the original work. Although he couldn't run wild like Banner, as long as he was careful, he was still enough to push the battlefield. However, to say that the most dazzling performance is undoubtedly Thor. As a god, Thor has his own pride, not to mention that he is still the so-called god of war in the 9 realms. But because of his arrogance, the gate of time and space opened and the alien army descended, so he was always simmering with anger and had nowhere to vent it. So now that he just entered the battle, he behaved extremely crazy. He kept waving the Thor's hammer in his hand, and lightning bolts fell down. Every time, an alien soldier would be reduced to ashes. Just like this, he still disliked the speed being too slow, so he simply activated his ultimate move, Thunderbolt, and directly summoned a side of Thunder Sea, killing countless people. Nick, who was watching the battle from behind, nodded in satisfaction at the performance of everyone on the battlefield. My previous strategy is still correct. Try to gather enough forces, although it may not be able to achieve a decisive effect, but it can also influence the direction of local wars. Thinking of this, Nick couldn't help but look up at the sky. Compared with everyone in S.H.I.E.L.D., Tony's place is the real priority. If he can stop Loki, then everyone will be happy, but if he can't, then things will be terrible. Alone, he is enough to wipe out Steve and others. With the help of an army, wouldn't he be even more unscrupulous? Therefore, although he couldn't see the scene on the sky, Nick still stared at the sky closely, hoping that Tony would continue to be invincible. And just when he was full of expectations for Tony, he didn't know that Tony didn't fight Loki at this moment. The two were like old friends, standing on the top floor of the Times building, overlooking the battle below. How about it? Are these soldiers very good? If there is no strong man to take action, I might really have a chance to rule this planet. Loki said calmly. Tony shook his head. There are no ifs in this world, and you should be clear that numbers don't matter much in front of the truly strong. I know, but I'm still a little reconciled. The big sweet potato used me as a pawn for temptation, and the hidden supreme regarded them as pawns for temptation. Is it true that the weak cannot control their own destiny? Ever since he learned that there is still a supreme being hidden on the earth, Loki knew that his idea of ruling the earth could not succeed. Therefore, for the arrival of the alien army this time, they are completely indifferent. Otherwise, I wouldn't sit back and watch the army fight to the death, and I'm here to tell Tony about my dissatisfaction. Listening to his words, Tony spread his hands and did not speak. But he didn't show a depressed mood, instead he looked completely indifferent, which made Loki feel a little doubtful. Don't you have the slightest idea of resignation? Got you. Loki didn't have much contact with Tony, but he found that Tony didn't seem to have any emotions similar to the unwillingness of the weak. No matter what he was doing, he was very indifferent, and even dared to openly tease a supreme being. It would be fine if he was a weakling, Loki could still use the ignorant as an excuse. But judging from Tony's performance, although Rocky doesn't know how strong he is definitely not weak. Coupled with the fact that he still knows the existence of strong people at the supreme level, it is even more impossible to be fearless because of ignorance. So here comes the question, what is his confidence that makes him have the confidence to tease the supreme? Loki was busy building the time-space gate before, and Loki didn't have time to think about it. Now that he thought about it, Tony suddenly shrouded a layer of fog in his eyes. There was a smile on the corner of his mouth. Tony looked at the curious Loki, shook his head slowly and said, "The Supreme also came from the weak, why should he be unwilling? Maybe I can't match the Supreme right now, but in the future, I will reach that level sooner or later, so there is nothing unwilling." Hearing this, the corner of Loki's mouth twitched, a little suspicious that Tony was fooling himself, but there was no evidence. What he said seemed to make sense, but in fact it was all nonsense. If hard work can really achieve the Supreme, then the Supreme is worthless. For example, he himself, among the gods in the realm of the gods, is already extremely talented, but he still has no confidence that he will set foot on the Supreme. But listening to Tony's tone, setting foot on Supreme is as simple as eating and drinking water, without any difficulty at all. Although I don't know where your confidence comes from, I would like to see it. Shaking his head, Loki issued an invitation to fight. Since he couldn't figure out where Tony got the confidence to say such a thing, let's fight. He wanted to see if this confident guy had the strength to match his confidence. Hearing this, Tony turned his head and glanced at him, with a hint of curiosity flashing in his eyes. He was also very curious about Loki's illusion coming true, so he nodded without any excuses. Okay, I also want to know how far my strength has reached. After accepting the invitation, the atmosphere between the two suddenly changed. If the two of them chatted like old friends before, now they are like life and death enemies, both exuding astonishing killing intent. For the two of them, if there is no exchange of ideas, if they want to fight, they really fight. If anyone is accidentally beaten to death, he deserves it. As the saying goes, dragons do not live with snakes. If there is no matching strength, neither Tony nor Loki will look at each other more. Boom. Tony took the lead, and two laser beams shot out from his eyes, shooting towards Loki. As a result, no surprise, the laser penetrated Loki's body, landed on the wall behind him, and blasted the wall. Seeing this, Tony immediately raised his brows. Although he already knew about Loki's ability, Tony was still a little surprised after trying it himself. He was sure that Loki was really standing in front of him just now, but he turned into an illusion without any warning, which is really amazing. At this time, another Loki appeared directly on Tony's body, punching Tony's cheek with a punch, and there was a strong sound of piercing through the air, making people feel that the punch seemed real. But Tony didn't dodge, because he knew very well that it didn't matter whether the punch was real or not, everything was just in Loki's mind. If I dodge this blow, then this blow is fake, if I can't dodge this blow, then this blow is real. Therefore, it is meaningless to guess whether Loki's attack is true or not. Boom! A powerful punch landed directly on Tony's face. Looking at this scene, a trace of disappointment flashed in Loki's eyes. If Tony only had this strength, then he might really want to kill this friend who still has an appetite today. But soon he discovered something was wrong. There was no change in Tony's body, not even a tilt of his head. More importantly, he didn't feel the touch that body collision should have. At this moment, Tony turned his head to look at Loki. Loki's fist was still in front of him, but if he looked carefully, he could find that Loki's fist was still a millimeter away from his cheek. Rocky hit a wall of air, not Tony. Realizing this, Loki smiled. What kind of ability is this? It's a bit like spiritual power. That's right, it's the telekinetic power evolved from spiritual power. Explaining with a smile, Tony did not stop attacking, and a telekinetic power of an invisible substance directly enveloped Loki, trapping him in place. He could feel that he had indeed trapped Loki's entity, that is to say, this was his real body. At the moment, the lasers in Tony's eyes reappeared and directly bombarded Loki's vitals. With the power of the pig spell, once this blow is implemented, Loki will be seriously injured even if he does not die. But Tony didn't mean to be soft at all. But unexpectedly, the laser failed again, and Loki was still standing in front of him. Through telekinesis, Tony was able to confirm that the Loki in front of him was the real body, not an illusion. Suddenly, Tony frowned. What's going on? I have to say, you really exceeded my expectations, and you were able to lock my real body. However, just because you locked my real body, it doesn't mean that what you see is really me. Or, you are not attacking me now. Loki tilted his head and smiled. Tony understood the meaning of his words in an instant, and his induction was not wrong, but the induction was completely different from what he saw, or his perception was blurred by Loki. For example, what I sense is that I am in front of me, but Loki is actually behind me. After thinking through this level, Tony couldn't help but feel a little amazed in his heart. Loki played tricks on the illusion. He believed that if Loki hadn't been trapped by his telekinetic power, he might have faced a stormy attack long ago. Slowly exhaling foul air from his mouth, Tony suppressed the shock in his heart. A confident smile appeared on his face again. You have indeed reached the pinnacle of illusion, but you must have forgotten that not everything in this world can be turned into reality. What? Loki frowned. A bad premonition suddenly rose in his heart. Tony didn't explain, just closed his eyes with a smile. In the next second, a transparent Tony suddenly emerged from his body, which was his soul body. Sheep spell, soul out of body. Compared with the perception of the physical body, the perception of the soul is more acute. Moreover, life is a miracle in the universe. Even if Loki's way of making illusions come true has reached its peak, it is impossible to simulate a real soul. Sure enough, after breaking away from the shackles of the physical body, Tony easily found Loki's real body. A smile emerged from the corner of his mouth, and Tony looked at Loki, who was standing not far from him, unable to move. Got you. The soul returned to the body, and the lasers in Tony's eyes burst out again, piercing towards a wall. And in the direction of the wall, it is exactly where Loki is. Looking at the burst of laser light, Loki's face changed, and the ability to make the fake come true was activated again, but this time it was no longer creating illusions but turning reality into reality. One after another defensive light curtains stood in front of him, and in just a short moment, Loki constructed more than a dozen defensive light curtains. But he underestimated the power of the pig charm. It was an energy laser condensed to the extreme, and ordinary defenses couldn't stop it at all. It only weakened the power of the two energy lasers, and the next moment, the two lasers directly landed on his chest, blasting him out. Boom! With an explosion, Tony's perception finally returned to normal. Loki was lying in a mess among the ruins. On his chest, a large hole the size of a watermelon appeared on him. Tony could even see his stomach through the hole in his chest. As for the internal organs, they have already been melted by the laser just now. But gods are gods, and their level of life is completely different from that of mortals. The injuries that are enough for ordinary people to die thousands of times are only serious injuries to Loki, and it is hard to say whether they will be fatal. Cough cough. A violent cough sounded, and Loki struggled to stand up from the ground. At the same time, the big hole in his chest healed quickly at a speed visible to the naked eye. Seeing this, Tony's brows twitched slightly, and there was a flash of surprise. Sharp, you are indeed stronger than I thought. Loki praised that although his appearance was a bit embarrassing, he still maintained the grace of a god. However, I am the god of fire. Deceit and lies are just one of the things I am good at. My real power is Lai Yan. As he said that, Loki raised a move, and a blaze of flames appeared in the palm of his hand, and the surrounding temperature began to rise rapidly, and a ray of flame appeared on his brow. It made him instantly full of majesty, and he also had a domineering temperament that he didn't have before. However, in Loki's imagination, the shocked expression on Tony's face did not appear, but a strange expression on his face. The next second, Tony also raised his hand, and a flame also emerged in his hand, and a dragon shape suddenly appeared between Tony's eyebrows. The same posture, the same flame, except for the different patterns between the eyebrows, the two of them are like looking in a mirror. Suddenly, Loki became restless. How is it possible? A scream came out of his mouth, and Loki stared at the flame in Tony's hand with a shocked face. Ordinary people may only be able to see flames, such appearances, but he is the god of fire, and he can see more things that ordinary people cannot see. For example, fire rules. The flame in Tony's hand is completely transformed by the rules of flame, which is more like Vulcan than his Vulcan. If it is said that he comprehended the rules and then controlled the flame, that Tony is to control the rules, so that the flames obey his control. There is a qualitative difference between the two. You are just a mortal, how can you control the rules? This is impossible. Loki said in a daze. At this moment he suddenly lost his usual calmness. And Tony looked at his state, and spread his hands helplessly, not knowing how to comfort him. After all, he is different from others. As a cheating player, he is suspected of pretending to say anything now, so it is better not to say anything. Judging by his appearance, he won't be able to calm down for a while, so Tony ignored him and turned to look downstairs. Everyone in S.H.I.E.L.D. is still struggling among the alien soldiers, and Tony also knows their purpose, and wants to dismantle the cosmic Rubik's Cube on the radiation device. Nick had already told him all the plans last night. But at this moment, not far from him, the radiation device and the Rubik's Cube are there, and he can solve this matter by reaching out his hand. But he didn't want to move. He had already completed the content of the transaction and held up Loki, and the rest was out of his control. Even if it can be solved by just using his hands, he has no intention of intervening. Just like that, the people from S.H.I.E.L.D. were desperately below, and Tony watched with gusto from the rooftop. At this moment, he was suddenly a little annoyed that he couldn't prepare a snack. He hadn't watched Avengers in his previous life, and now he managed to watch the live version, but he didn't have snacks. There is no popcorn in popcorn movies, so I always feel that something is missing. Thoughts in my mind fluttered randomly, and time passed by little by little. Finally, Steve and others broke through the army and entered the Times building, rushing towards the top floor. In order to solve this matter as soon as possible, they used their speed to the extreme. But the closer they got to the top floor, the more uneasy everyone felt. In their opinion, Tony and Rocky should fight very fiercely. But now, they didn't hear any movement. Could it be that Tony failed? Thinking of this, everyone frowned and their eyes became more serious. As for Tony taking down Loki, none of them thought of it. After all, after seeing Loki's ability to make the illusion come true, they didn't think Tony could crack such a weird ability. In this way, the people who were speculating and uneasy came all the way to the top floor of the Times building and opened the door. Immediately, the figures of Tony and Loki came into everyone's eyes at the same time, and everyone froze in place. I saw that the two were looking in their direction with calm faces, the atmosphere was very harmonious, and there was no tension at all. For a moment, everyone couldn't help but thumped in their hearts. Steve even frowned and stepped forward. You really betrayed mankind. He has always been prejudiced against Tony. Seeing the harmony between the two, he immediately felt that Tony had taken refuge in Loki. For such a person full of prejudice, Tony didn't bother to pay attention to him at all, so he ignored him at all, and just yawned, you guys are too slow. The cosmic Rubik's Cube and the radiation device are right there, you can solve it yourself, I'll go first. What do? Do you want to come with me? Tony turned his head to look at Loki beside him, and issued the invitation for the second time. Compared to the silent refusal last time, this time, Loki thought about it, nodded immediately and said, yes, it just so happens that I have a new understanding of flames, maybe you can give me more inspiration. After finishing speaking, the two walked towards the stairs together, one in front of the other. Seeing the two people approaching, Steve and the others froze for a moment, then looked at them with vigilance, and made way for them by the way. Loki. Saul in the crowd suddenly spoke. Loki stopped walking and turned to look at him with a trace of doubt on his face. Seeing this, Saul didn't know what to say for a moment, so he could only take a deep breath and said, I will definitely catch you back to God's domain. Anything, see you later. Responding with a smile, Loki followed Tony's pace and left the Times building. Loki followed Tony. Steve and the others looked at the radiation device and the Rubik's Cube not far away, and suddenly felt like a clown. They tried their best to fight life and death, claiming to represent justice. But in the end, Loki didn't care what they did. This filled everyone with weirdness, and even their sense of justice to save the world was weakened a lot. And Tony, what happened between him and Loki? Why did Loki leave with him? Everyone was full of doubts. Fortunately, Steve did not forget their mission, and quickly stepped forward to disassemble the Rubik's Cube. Although Loki is gone, the alien army is still descending continuously. Everyone has even seen a spaceship sailing out of the time-space gate. If it really comes down, how many people will die? Boom! A terrifying wave of energy centered on the Times building and swept away in all directions. The cosmic Rubik's Cube was forcibly taken down, and the time-space gate hanging in the sky flickered for a moment and then closed. The energy contained in the radiation device was directly out of balance because of taking away the Rubik's Cube, resulting in a big explosion. Fortunately, the power of the explosion was not very great, and only a few buildings were destroyed. Finished. Nick looked at the sky full of smoke and dust, a little uncertain. The originally fierce gunfire had stopped at this moment, and the space-time gate that brought people great pressure disappeared completely. At this time, the figures of Steve and others walked out from the smoke and dust. Seeing this, a gleam of joy flashed in Nick's eyes. Solve it. Although he already knew the answer, he still wanted to get confirmation from everyone. Steve nodded, and at the same time stretched out his right hand, and the cosmic Rubik's Cube was quietly falling on his hand. Immediately, Nick breathed a sigh of relief, and his tense mind completely relaxed. Okay, good job. As he said that, Nick was about to reach out to take the Rubik's Cube, but at this moment, Steve took his hand back instantly. Suddenly, Nick frowned and looked at Steve puzzled. Director, I want to know what you plan to do with the cosmic Rubik's Cube. Steve said in a low voice. Nick thought he was still angry because of Tony, so he tried to persuade him immediately. Captain, I know you don't like Tony. However, if we don't hand over the Rubik's Cube to him, we can't afford the consequences. For the sake of the overall situation, Nick was also worried. Then did Loki leave with Tony? What? Nick looked stunned, completely unaware of the news. And Steve continued, I don't know how they got together, but if you give the Rubik's Cube to Tony, it means giving it to Loki again. Then what are we working so hard for? Speaking of which, Steve stared at Nick firmly, and Nick, who was originally determined, was also full of uncertainty at the moment. Probably not. Tony is Tony, and Rocky is Rocky. Boss, do you want to take a gamble? Steve laughed to himself. Nick remained silent, betting the safety of the entire United States, he couldn't do it. He believed that Tony would not use the Rubik's Cube to do anything, but if he handed the Rubik's Cube to Loki again, who could guarantee that what happened today would not happen again? Thinking of this, Nick looked at the Rubik's Cube in Steve's hand with a headache. This thing has completely become a hot potato now, it's not for giving, and it's not for not giving. Forget it, let's talk about this matter later, let's finish the current matter first, please help save people together. Unable to think of a solution, Nick simply gave up the choice and settled the matter at hand first. Although the surrounding residents have already evacuated, the explosion just now affected many soldiers. Although there will be special rescuers, they are not as fast as many extraordinary people. Hearing this, everyone nodded and scattered to rescue them. As for the cosmic Rubik's Cube, it was subconsciously ignored by everyone at the moment, and it was temporarily kept by Steve. On the other side, Rocky followed Tony back to the seaside villa in Liberty City. Under the power of money, in just a few days, the destroyed villa has been completely restored to its original state. Jarvis, long time no see, how are you doing? As soon as he entered the door, Tony greeted him. Suddenly, in the hall, Jarvis' voice sounded. Sir, long time no see, I'm fine. Introduce me, Loki. Tony introduced Loki without looking back. Hello, Mr. Rocky, welcome to Mr. Tony's villa. Jarvis greeted Rocky. Hello. Responding, Loki glanced at the villa in surprise, and asked curiously, what did you just say? Why don't I feel the breath of life? Artificial intelligence, a product of technology, red wine or coffee? While answering, Tony opened the refrigerator. Although he hasn't been here for a few days, the supplies in the villa are replenished every day. Wine bar. In response, Loki sat on the sofa, with a hint of exclamation on his face, silicon-based lifeform. It feels almost the same as real life. Thank you for the compliment, Mr. Rocky, I still have a lot to learn. Jarvis answered. Suddenly, Rocky and Jarvis chatted. The two have an artificial intelligence and a god, and their knowledge is very vast. After chatting freely, Tony actually felt a hint of sympathy from the tone of these two guys. At that moment, Tony couldn't help raising his eyebrows, and some strange thoughts flashed in his mind. Putting the red wine in front of Loki, Tony took a sip. Are you interested in artificial intelligence? Hearing this, Loki was stunned, then smiled and shook his head. No, I have seen many silicon-based life in the universe, but none of them have the thinking ability of Jarvis. Their thinking ability is very strong, but compared to Jarvis, it is more like a set program. They don't have the learning and growth ability of Jarvis, so they are a little curious. Hearing this, Tony smiled, and tentatively said, You don't have anything to do recently, do you need me to arrange a research room for you, study artificial intelligence, and find something for you to do? When the time comes, I'll let Jarvis cooperate with you. Hearing this proposal, Loki couldn't help but lower his head and think for a while, but quickly made a decision. It's okay, I'm really interested in this aspect. After speaking, the two collided with the red wine in the glass. Although Rocky has never been exposed to technology, neither he nor Tony thinks he is bad. God is an existence that transcends ordinary life. Although the gods in this world are a bit weak in Tony's view, it is undeniable that creatures like gods have a strong learning ability. Even if it is a field that has never been touched, as long as you study hard, you will definitely make achievements. After all, the Soul Stone is in this guy's hands, so maybe he can work out something with Jarvis. Shield, meeting room. The cosmic Rubik's Cube was placed in the center of the conference table. Nick and the others all stared at the cosmic Rubik's Cube on the table, but no one spoke, and the atmosphere was somewhat depressed. Everyone avoided the choice before, but what should come has to come. After dealing with everything, they had to face a question. whether to hand in the cosmic Rubik's Cube or not. Handing it over may cause today's tragedy to repeat itself. If you don't hand it over, you have to consider who can bear it once Tony takes revenge. It can be said that apart from Thor, everyone else present had dealt with Tony. Even Steve, who was most upset with Tony, had to admit that once Tony retaliated, the disaster caused would be no less than that of Loki. So, this is a dilemma. In the end, Saul couldn't stand the depressing atmosphere, so he got up impatiently and said, "If there's anything to worry about, if it doesn't work, let me deal with that guy named Tony, kill him, and everything will be fine." After the words fell, everyone looked at him with strange faces, and the corner of Nick's mouth twitched, feeling that the scene in front of him was a little familiar. Saul seemed to have said before that he would solve Loki, but what happened? Not only did it not solve the problem, but it made it worse. For a while, no one spoke, just looked at Saul quietly, and finally Saul couldn't bear the pressure and sat down unwillingly. "This doesn't work, and that doesn't work, so what do you say? Continue to waste here." Thor's unhappy voice sounded, with some helplessness in his tone. He, the majestic god of war of the Nine Realms, would be helpless against a mortal. Before fighting Loki, he didn't even dare to think about it. However, now he has to admit that the mortal who can make Loki bow his head is really not something he can deal with. Saul's words broke the silence in the meeting room. Nick, who was in the main seat, took a deep breath, and took the initiative to answer. "Since you are sitting here, it means that none of you are willing to hand over the Rubik's Cube to Tony. In this case, let's skip this question and look at the next question. How to deal with Tony? Everyone knows about Tony's strength. To deal with him, we are definitely not enough. Therefore, we must find ways to increase our strength. In addition, if you have a familiar transcendent, you can also recommend it. In short, you don't have to be restrained. You can raise any ideas, as long as there is a possibility of implementation." As the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., Nick's leadership is beyond doubt. As soon as you open your mouth, you should completely characterize the matter, instead of letting everyone continue to struggle with a choice. Sure enough, when the matter came to fruition, everyone was no longer silent and began to speak freely. Steve proposed to let everyone fuse with the symbiosis to enhance their strength. As a beneficiary, he knew very well how much the symbiosis would increase the strength of the extraordinary. This is what Nick planned, but it has been cultivating new symbionts before, so it has not been implemented for a long time. Now, when Steve mentioned it, Nick agreed directly. In order to deal with Tony, Banner also spent a lot of money, and offered to propose that the blood in his body can give people powerful power, and he was willing to act as a test product and create a strengthening potion. As for Flint, although Eddie and others didn't have any constructive opinions, they also expressed their determination to fight Tony. Under Nick's guidance, the heavy atmosphere just now was swept away in the conference room, and everyone became united in hatred. And Tony, who didn't know that Nick, who was determined to die, planned to renege on his debts, after throwing Loki into the underground laboratory to study artificial intelligence, suddenly received a call from Reed. On the phone, Reed described his research progress, and planned to take a spacecraft to outer space to obtain the ultimate mystery hidden in human genes. In this regard, Tony expressed his support and wished them a smooth journey, then hung up the phone. In a blink of an eye, a week passed quickly. This week, Tony's life can be said to be uneventful. He went to the company during the day for a walk, and at night he either asked Natasha or Potts. When he was tired of the taste, he ordered a few plates of wild grasses for a change. For this reason, Tony appeared on the cover of another issue of Playboy, which made countless melon eaters hooked. But on this day, Tony's leisurely life came to an end again. Reed and others came back, but all of them were seriously injured and sent to the hospital. Although he knew that this was the beginning of their change of fate, Tony rushed to Maria Hospital as soon as possible. After all, it is necessary to get good impressions as early as possible. If you can get all the Fantastic Four under your command at once, then you can unlock all of your Shadow Corps. However, when Tony came to the hospital, he saw an unexpected person, Nick. Suddenly, Tony frowned. Why is he here? Doubts arose in his heart, and Tony walked over. The crisp footsteps echoed in the hospital corridor, and Nick, who was outside the ward, turned his head immediately. After seeing Tony, Nick also frowned, obviously very surprised by Tony's appearance. "Why are you here?" Tony asked directly. "I need Mr. Reed's advice on something. I heard that something happened to him, so I came here to take a look." Nick had a smile on his face and was very friendly. Those who didn't know thought he and Tony were good friends. Seeing this, Tony felt a little wary. Nick, the old Yinbi, was so kind and weird today. Could it be that he knew about Reed and others' acquisition of extraordinary abilities? This thought just popped into my mind, but it was dismissed by Tony in an instant. It is also because I have seen some movies in my previous life that I was able to know the news at the first time. Unless Nick is also a time traveler, otherwise, it is impossible for him to know at this time. If it wasn't for this incident, why would Nick appear here? He and Reed have no friendship. A series of doubts popped up in my mind, but unfortunately Tony didn't find the answer. At this time, the door of the ward opened, and the doctor came out of it, looked at Tony and said, "You can visit, but they need to rest, and the time should not be too long." Hearing this, both of them nodded, and then Nick looked at Tony and said, "Shall we go in together?" "No, you go first, I'll wait." Tony rejected Nick's proposal. He wanted to see what Nick was doing today. Hearing this, Nick didn't refuse, and turned around and walked into the ward directly, but when the door of the ward was closed, a trace of solemnity appeared on Nick's face. The reason why he came to Reed was because of the strengthening agent. Although Banner is willing to provide blood, it will be used as experimental material for S.H.I.E.L.D. to create a strengthening agent. But what is embarrassing is that the scientists of S.H.I.E.L.D. could not resolve the mystery of the blood in his body at all, let alone create a strengthening agent. For this reason, he deliberately investigated the scientists Tony had contacted when Banner was imprisoned. Finally found Reed, and Tony's sudden appearance almost made Nick think that it was their intention to make a booster that had leaked. But looking at Tony's performance, it doesn't look like he knows about it, so what is Tony doing here? During the few short steps into the ward, Nick's mind can be said to be in 1,000 turns. Like Tony, he kept thinking about the purpose of the other party's trip. Neither of the two thought that the other was here to visit the patient. Unless they were relatives or had necessary interests, such things as visiting patients would never happen to them. It can be said that everything they do is full of purpose. Soon, Nick calmed down and focused his attention on the ward, but when he saw the 4 people on the ward, the corners of Nick's mouth twitched. The 4 of Reed were wrapped up like mummies one by one at the moment. Except for the mouth and eyes, the rest of the body was wrapped in bandages, which looked very funny. Fortunately, Nick's energy-raising skills are good, and he didn't show the slightest abnormality, and there was even a hint of concern on his face. "Are you all okay?" After the words fell, Reed's weak voice sounded. "Thank you for your concern, we are okay, but I don't know who you are." As he said that, Reed showed a trace of doubt in his eyes. And Nick seemed to have realized it at this time, quickly patted his head, and introduced himself. "My name is Nick Fury, and I am from the government. I heard that there was an accident in your research, so I came to see you." Nick had a sincere face, and Reed and the others couldn't help showing a touch of emotion on their faces. Although their research received Tony's investment, it was originally funded by the government in the early stage, so they naturally have a certain liking for the government. Now that something happened to them, Nick came to visit them as soon as possible on behalf of the government. They were emotionally fragile after experiencing danger, so they were naturally more easily moved. "Thank you, Mr. Nick, for coming to visit us. Our research failed this time, and it really failed the government's expectations." As they said that, there was a hint of guilt in the eyes of Reed and the others. Seeing this, Nick quickly said that it was okay, and then asked about the conditions of several people. "How is your physical condition? What did the doctor say?" After the words fell, the mood of several people became even more depressed. Among them, Johnny, the youngest, said in a depressed tone, "A large area of the body is burned, and the muscles all over the body are necrotic. We will probably be useless in the future." As soon as these words came out, the atmosphere in the ward suddenly became oppressive, and even Reed, who was the most mature, felt sad at the moment. But watching everyone's performance, Nick, who looked sad on the surface, was overjoyed at the moment. The purpose of his trip was to ask Reed to help develop the enhancer. But after meeting Tony, his purpose changed. He wanted to absorb all of them into S.H.I.E.L.D. He didn't know what Tony was plotting, but he knew that Tony's plot must have something to do with Reed and the others. That being the case, as long as he absorbed them into S.H.I.E.L.D. in advance, no matter what plans Tony had, they would all come to nothing. Thinking of this, Nick immediately encouraged, "Don't worry, the government will not disappoint any hero. You all have done a great service to this country. I will mobilize the best medical resources to treat you. In addition, you don't have to worry about work. On behalf of the S.H.I.E.L.D. I work for, I solemnly promise that as long as you are willing, you can enter our S.H.I.E.L.D. and continue to participate in research work. And in order to compensate you for the pain that you may suffer in the future, on behalf of the government, I will give each of you 1 million yuan in compensation." Nick had an expression of thinking about them, and Johnny and the others couldn't help being stunned after hearing his words. They were useless, almost useless, and yet Nick was willing to take them in, offering them not only compensation but jobs. For the few people who were in the trough, this can be called the savior online. For a moment, several people were very moved, but Reed was smarter than everyone after all. Not only was he not moved by the conditions offered by Nick, even the good impression just now disappeared in an instant, and he became vigilant. There has never been such a thing as a pie falling in the sky, let alone just hitting yourself on the head. If it really appears one day, then you have to be vigilant, maybe someone else has a deeper conspiracy. Their current situation is completely crippled, and before the danger period has passed, Nick offers all kinds of favorable conditions here. It is nonsense to say that there is nothing else, and it is entirely out of humanitarianism. Having lived in this country for so long, Reed has long seen the nature of this country clearly. Pure capital face, when you are useful, you will be praised in various ways. Once you lose value, no one will look at you at all. Therefore, Nick's conditions not only did not move Reed's heart, but instead made him instantly full of vigilance. "Mr. Nick, thank you for your kindness, but we have signed an agreement with Stark Industries, and the company will compensate us at that time." Reed raised Stark Industries, which is tantamount to rejecting Nick's proposal in disguise. Hearing this, Nick remained calm on the surface, but became anxious in his heart. He didn't expect Tony to be so ruthless, but he was not reconciled to letting him give up like this. He doesn't know what's good about these people, but it's worth Tony's trip, it's definitely not bad. No matter what, he had to bring 2 people back. Even if it was useless, he didn't mind raising a few useless people. "Mr. Reed, you can't say that. Stark Industries is not a philanthropy, but a capital. Do you think they will continue to support you when they find out that you have become useless people?" "Impossible. I think you know the face of capital better than anyone else. I am different. I represent the government. As long as you are willing, you will always be a government employee." In terms of fighting, Nick may not even be considered as fighting the 5 scumbags, but when it comes to understanding people's hearts and human nature, he is definitely a master. The few people who had just been stabilized by Reed hesitated immediately after hearing this. Even Reed himself was becoming uncertain. Although based on his understanding of Tony is not such a person, but capital is always ruthless, and capitalists are things that turn their faces and deny people. So he couldn't guarantee whether everything Tony had promised would still work. Thinking about it this way, he couldn't stop others. And even he, the person who had the most contact with Tony, became unconfident, let alone the others. They didn't have much contact with Tony at all, and all their knowledge came from gossip. At this time, they didn't dare to bet on whether Tony's character was reliable. Therefore, Ben among the 4 soon agreed to Nick's invitation first. "Mr. Nick, I am willing to join S.H.I.E.L.D. It is good." Several, "What do you mean?" Nick looked at the 3 of Reed with a smile, his eyes full of expectation, and after seeing Ben's agreement, Johnny, who was not very firm at all, completely fell to S.H.I.E.L.D. "I agree." After finishing speaking, Johnny looked at Susan, who was in the bed next to him. "Sister, you agree too. If you miss this opportunity, there will be no next opportunity." Hearing this, Susan opened her mouth, but in the end she didn't directly agree, but looked at Reed and said, "Reed, what do you think?" After the words fell, Ben and Johnny also looked at Reed instantly. As the leader of the team, Reed still has prestige, but it is about their respective futures, so Ben and Johnny made the choice directly. They naturally also hope that Reed agrees, so that their small team can be together again, and more importantly, as long as Reed agrees, then they will not feel guilty about betraying the team. Looking at their expectant eyes, Reed sighed slightly, knowing that their small team had come to an end. Sorry, thank the government for their kindness, but I have already belonged to Stark Industries. Reed directly refused. Nick's expression changed slightly, then he smiled and said, Are you worried about liquidated damages? Don't worry, no matter how much liquidated damages are, we will bear them directly. You just need to follow your heart and make a choice. Nick's promise can be said to be extremely generous, but because of this, Reed resisted even more. To be courteous for nothing, to rape or steal, although he doesn't know this sentence, but he knows that the society is dangerous, so he still shook his head firmly. Seeing this scene, Nick was immediately filled with disappointment. If he knew Reed's inner thoughts, he might vomit blood even more. He just wanted to cut off the beard, and he really had no bad intentions. Although disappointed with Reed's refusal, for this sake, he can only count as one more. Then, Miss Susan, what do you think? Nick asked, but Susan ignored him, just looked at Reed and said sadly, Reed, are you not going to be with us? No, Reed refused decisively. He didn't know Nick well, and he was more willing to trust Tony than him. It's a pity that he can't influence other people's thoughts, so he can only watch Ben and Johnny join S.H.I.E.L.D. Seeing Reed refusing, Susan subconsciously wanted to refuse, but at this moment Johnny called out. Sister. After the words fell, the rejection that Susan was about to say suddenly stopped on her lips. Her brother has already joined S.H.I.E.L.D., how could she leave him behind? Suddenly, Susan smiled bitterly, I also agree to join. After the words fell, Nick smiled, and the faces of the four of Reed darkened. The once close team finally chose to part ways when faced with future choices. The so-called Fantastic Four will never appear again in the future, and they died before they were formed. Outside the ward, Tony was sitting on a bench in the corridor, while Happy stood aside. Suddenly the corners of Tony's mouth twitched slightly. You don't need me to train you, you just blackened yourself. Nick, you did a great job. I cheered in my heart, but on the surface Tony still maintained a calm posture. Tony, who was curious about what Nick wanted to do, had enveloped the entire ward with telekinesis since he entered the ward, listening to all their conversations. When Nick poached people at the beginning, Tony did have the urge to break in. After all, these people were all members of the Dark Alliance that he had planned. If you dare to rob someone with yourself, you can't kill him by yourself. However, before he left, he realized a problem. Although I can stop Nick and offer better conditions, how can I get them to join the Dark Alliance? After all, the Fantastic Four are decent heroes, not those villains, and they are naturally in line with the purpose of the Dark Alliance, so they can join as long as they agree. A decent hero needs to be further blackened if he wants to join the Dark Alliance. Only by falling into darkness can he meet the income standard of the Dark Alliance, just like Peter once did. If the four of them are directly recruited, then based on their worldview, it would definitely be a laborious task to blacken them and reach the standard of joining the Dark Alliance. But after Nick stepped in, things were different. Although it is natural for the three of Johnny to choose to join S.H.I.E.L.D. for their own reasons, from another perspective, this is not a kind of betrayal. The four of them have worked together for many years and have a deep relationship. If they suddenly encounter betrayal, no matter how decent they are, I'm afraid they won't feel good. This gave Tony the opportunity to lead people into the darkness more easily. Realizing this, Tony also remembered the test that Reed had been tested. At that time, he invited Reed to join the Dark Alliance and did not receive a systematic response. Apart from the fact that he was not that Mr. Fantastic, it was probably because he still insisted on justice in his heart. After clearing his mind, Tony was not only no longer angry with Nick for cutting off his beard, but wanted to thank him instead. As the saying goes, it is better to have a bird in hand than 1,000 birds in the forest. It is like recruiting a group of heroes who cannot join the Dark Alliance. It is better to recruit a villain who can directly join the Dark Alliance. This is why Tony has loved villains for so long. Click. The door of the ward opened suddenly at this moment, and Nick walked out with a smile on his face. Mr. Tony, I'm done visiting, it's your turn. By the way, it is inconvenient for 4 people to recuperate in one room. I have already contacted the hospital and arranged for them to have separate wards. Except for Reed, the other 3 will be transferred to other wards. Nick laughed, in fact showing off naked. He had been suppressed by Tony for so long, and now he cut off his beard from him. Nick was elated, so he naturally wanted to show it off. He believed that Tony could understand the meaning of his words. However, in his imagination, the scene where Tony was furious did not appear. Even on the contrary, after Tony finished listening, a smile appeared on his face. Well, then thank you for helping me settle them. I also have a headache about how to deal with it. After all, people are useless. It's not humane to care about it, and it's a waste of money to care about it. You can take over them, it really helped me solve a headache, you are a good person. He casually sent a good person card to Nick, ignoring Nick's bewildered expression, and Tony walked right past him. Since he dared to show off in front of him, Tony didn't mind putting eye drops on him. After all, the 3 people who haven't shown extraordinary abilities are indeed 3 wastes. As soon as they entered the ward, several nurses came in and transferred the 3 of Johnny to another ward. They passed by Tony and looked at him with complicated eyes, while Tony watched them leave the ward indifferently without saying a word. After the 3 of Johnny left completely, Tony sat next to Reed with a smile on his lips. How are you feeling? Can you get out of bed? Hearing this, Reed rolled his eyes helplessly. Mr. Tony, do you think I can get out of bed like this? Compared with chatting with Nick, Reed's tone now is more casual and comfortable. Forget about those 3 trash, you are a person who has been injected with a booster, don't pretend to be garlic here. Tony ignored his miserable appearance and said impatiently. Hearing this, a trace of embarrassment flashed in Reed's eyes, and then he remembered that Tony knew his details. At that moment, he who was wrapped up like a mummy and couldn't move, actually sat up directly from the bed. If the 3 of Johnny saw this scene, they would definitely be stunned. It was difficult for them to move even now, and Reed was able to move freely as a result. Looking at this scene, Tony nodded and said, it's more or less the same. How about it, the feeling of being betrayed? Tony went straight to the point without any cover-up. Reed glanced at him in surprise, you already know. After finishing speaking, he shook his head helplessly, it's not really a betrayal, everyone has their own choice. Is it? You don't think it's a betrayal, but other people probably don't think so. Tony hinted. After the words fell, Reed smiled, I understand them, they are not such people, I believe they can understand me too. Reed said confidently. Hearing this, the corners of Tony's mouth turned up slightly. Since you're so confident, let me show you what they think of you behind your back. No need, Reed said hesitantly. Tony bewitched at the side. Don't you believe in your own judgment? It doesn't matter if you look at it. Besides, don't you wonder what kind of person you are in what they say? Curiosity is human nature, and even a genius like Reed cannot avoid it. If he didn't have any ideas at first, but after Tony's repeated encouragement, curiosity finally defeated reason. If you want to say that, then take a look. But how do we look at it? We can't look at it openly. Reed was a little puzzled. Tony smiled without explaining, but suddenly reached out and grabbed him. The next second, his soul was directly pulled out of his body by Tony. Although all of Tony's power comes from system rewards, it doesn't mean that Tony is really not self-motivated. When he is free, he will still take time to study his abilities. Among them, the sheep charm has made the most progress. It has not only studied the power of telekinetics, but also developed a way to draw out other people's souls. In this way, the ability of the sheep charm is much stronger than that in the anime. Well, what's going on here? Reed, who had turned into a soul body, looked at his illusory body in shock. Whether the soul exists has always been a major research topic for contemporary scientists, but no one can prove it. But now, his soul has gone out of his body, which is undoubtedly a great shock to a top scientist like Reed. The power of the sheep charm flowed in his eyes. Seeing Reed's shocked look, Tony smiled without explaining. He hadn't come to discuss science with Reed. He wanted to take this opportunity to completely lead Reed into the darkness. Let's go and see what your friends say about you behind your back. After finishing speaking, Tony walked towards the door, and Happy looked at the sleeping Reed suspiciously, and was about to follow Tony, but Tony's words came at this time. Don't follow me, you stay here first. Oh, good boss. Happy touched his head, wondering where Tony was going. Outside the door, Tony led Reed to the intensive care unit quickly. Originally, Nick wanted to arrange a ward for each of them, but because they had just taken refuge, the three of them felt very insecure, so they wanted to stay with their familiar partners, so they only opened an intensive care ward. When he came to the door, it was impossible for Tony to open the door and enter. He glanced around the corridor to confirm that there was no one there, and there was no surveillance. Tony sank and melted into the darkness of the ground. When he reappeared, he had already entered the ward and stood in the corner. Because the body was shrouded in darkness, people outside couldn't see Tony at all. With a glance, except that the light in this corner was a little dimmer than other places, they couldn't detect any abnormalities at all. Only Reed, because his soul is controlled by Tony, can perceive his position, but he can't see Tony's figure. As a soul body, Reed can pass through most material things, so he floated directly into the ward, suspended above the heads of the three of Johnny. At this moment, the three of Johnny below him were chatting, and the content of the chat was about Reed, but they didn't say anything bad. This made Reed, who was floating on the top of the room, heaved a sigh of relief. Although he was very confident before, he was unavoidably a little nervous. Now that he got the result, Reed immediately turned his head and looked in Tony's direction and said, "Well, I'm right, they will respect my choice, just like I respect them." Tony, who was hiding in the darkness, heard this, a strange smile appeared on his face, and at the same time, he said with telekinetic power, "Don't worry, keep reading." After finishing speaking, 3 wisps of dark aura invisible to Reed quietly got into the bodies of the three of Johnny under Tony's command. Because they didn't actively embrace the darkness, the dark aura wouldn't stay on the three of them for too long, but during the time it stayed, it would magnify the dark side of the three of them. Immediately, under the influence of the dark breath, the chatter between Johnny and the three gradually changed. "Ben, I still don't understand why Reed must stay at Stark Industries, join S.H.I.E.L.D. with us, and continue to do research together, isn't it good?" Johnny, HMPH, "It's because we've become useless people and don't want to be with us anymore, for fear of dragging him down." Susan, "Probably not, Reed should be that kind of person." Johnny, "Sister, you are still talking to him, if he didn't want to abandon us, why didn't he join S.H.I.E.L.D. with us? That person has already said that he will bear all liquidated damages. He has nothing to worry about." Ben, "Johnny was right. Reed just wanted to abandon us. He betrayed our friendship, the traitor." Susan, "You are right, he is indeed a traitor, and he also betrayed my love with him." Chapter 71. As the saying goes, a good word will warm the winter 3 times, and a bad word will hurt people and the 6 months will be cold. Reed floated on the roof, listening to the complaints of the 3 people below. His originally calm face gradually turned pale. It never occurred to him that he was such a person in the mouth of his partners, and was even regarded as a traitor by them. Could it be that he was so unbearable in their hearts? Although he has become a soul body, he can no longer feel the cold and heat, but at this moment Reed feels his whole body is chilling. Ben, we can't let him go so easily. A traitor should have the fate of a traitor. Johnny, you are right. It is his dream to study the mysteries of human genes. Although this time it failed, the research is not wrong. We will publish these data to let him know the fate of betrayal. Susan, yes, let's do it. The conversation between the 3 people below was still going on, but Reed didn't want to listen anymore, and turned around and floated out of the room. And after he left, the dark aura in the 3 of Johnny's bodies dissipated one after another. Immediately, the 3 people who were originally full of anger calmed down instantly and looked at each other in astonishment. In the dark, Tony took a look at the stunned state of the 3 of them, with a smile on his lips, and left the ward as well. Back in Reed's ward, seeing Reed who had opened his eyes and stared blankly at the roof, Tony shrugged, "You should have a good rest first, and I'll see you later." After speaking, regardless of whether Reed responded or not, he turned around and left the ward with Happy. The seed of darkness has been planted, now it's just a matter of being patient and waiting for it to take root. Not long after Tony left the hospital, a young man in a suit and leather shoes walked into the hospital, holding a bouquet of flowers in his hand. Because of his handsome appearance and mature temperament, the young man attracted a lot of attention along the way. Arriving at the nurse's station, a black girl was preparing medicine, and the young man's gentle voice suddenly sounded. "Hello, Where is Reed's ward? After saying that, the nurse raised her head to look at the young man. Her face turned rosy in an instant, and then said shyly, "The corner is at the end of the corridor." "Well, I get off work at 6 o'clock in the evening." After speaking, the nurse copied a phone number, handed it to the young man, and made a gesture to call. The young man smiled gently, took the note, nodded to the nurse, and then left. When passing by a trash can, the note that was originally put in the bag by the youth was directly thrown into the trash can. In the ward, Reed was still in a daze. When there was a sound of the door being pushed open, Reed didn't look back, thinking it was a nurse or a doctor. "Hi, Reed," the young man said with a smile on his face. Hearing the sound, Reed instantly turned his head to look at the person coming, with a hint of surprise flashing in his eyes. "Victor, how did you come? I heard that something happened to you, so I came to see you. Your favorite tulip." With that said, Victor placed the bouquet on the bedside. The two were good friends in college, and they were also academic masters. If Tony hadn't intervened, Victor would have invested in Reed's research. And Reed, who had just experienced a blow, also had a look of joy on his face when he saw Victor's arrival. "It's been a long time since I graduated. I haven't seen you. I thought you had returned to China." Reed was happily reminiscing about the old days, and Victor smiled and exchanged greetings with him. Suddenly Victor changed the subject. "I heard that you went to space this time to observe cosmic storms, obtain information, and decipher the ultimate mystery of human genes. What happened?" Hearing this, a wry smile suddenly appeared on Reed's face. "What else can I do? Don't you think I'm just lying here now? Then you didn't suffer in vain this time, and you got nothing." "Who said that? Although there was a little accident, I still got a lot of information," Reed countered. Victor's face changed, and then he said calmly, "Really, congratulations. To be honest, I am also interested in the information contained in the cosmic storm. Can you tell me about it?" Hearing this, Reed is not surprised. Victor has always been very curious about the mysteries of the universe since he was in school. "Sorry, Victor, I want to help you too, but the information is all in my head now, and I can't find a suitable way to express him. Unless I wait for a while to study and see if I can record it." "Well, that would be a pity," Victor said regretfully. Seeing this, in order to change the subject, Reed was planning to chat with him about interesting things in college, but he heard Victor continue to say, "Reed, I actually appreciate you, but you have the information I need in your mind, sorry." Victor apologized. After hearing this, Reed couldn't help but change his expression. He had just been hit, and his mood was already sensitive, so Victor's current performance immediately made him vigilant. "What do you mean? Victor, what do you want to do?" "It's okay, soon, I will try not to make you feel pain," Victor answered irrelevantly while grabbing his head with his right hand. Seeing this, Reed immediately couldn't care less about hiding, and he jumped up and punched Victor. A strong piercing sound sounded, Victor's face changed, and in the next second, his body instantly became unreal, and Reed's fist passed directly through his body and landed on the wall. Boom! A big hole was blasted out of the wall by Reed, making a huge movement. At the same time, Reed, who was originally wrapped in gauze, also broke free from the shackles of the gauze at this moment, and looked at Victor vigilantly with his upper body bare. Seeing Reed's intact appearance, a gleam of light flashed in Victor's eyes. "Are you waiting for me?" Obviously, seeing Reed's appearance, he thought that Reed had already noticed his existence, so he set up a special situation to wait for him. "No, I just want to rest in the hospital. I didn't expect you to do anything to me." "Victor, why, have I offended you in any way?" Reed's face was full of doubts, but at the same time he was shocked. He didn't expect that Victor was not an ordinary person. He and him have been in college for several years, and he didn't notice any abnormalities at all. "You didn't offend me, but I need the information in your head. However, you seem to have become different. It seems that I need to do something." While speaking, Victor raised his hand and pointed, and a vast wave of energy suddenly gathered at his fingertips and bombarded towards Reed. All this is a long story, but it is actually done in an instant. Reed looked at the beam of energy coming from the bombardment, and his face changed instantly. He felt the breath of death in Victor's attack. "What?" With a loud shout, Reed finally used all his strength, not caring about hiding it. Immediately, his body swelled instantly, turning into a little giant several meters tall. with his hands covering his chest, resisting Victor's energy beam. Boom! The terrifying shock wave directly blasted Reed out, and the entire ward was in a mess as if it had been ravaged by a typhoon. Blood spewed out of Reed's mouth, and he looked at Victor with a solemn face when he fell to the ground. His thoughts kept turning, thinking about how to escape. Victor put away his fingers casually, and shook his head at the same time. A clone is a clone after all, and it can only be played to this extent. After finishing speaking, Victor looked at Reed with a calm face and said, "Don't struggle, although I don't know where you got this strength, but the strength is still too weak. Surrender obediently, and you will suffer less." Hearing this, a smile appeared on Reed's embarrassed face. "Don't you know me for 4 years in college? When did you see me give up?" "That's right." Victor smiled dumbly, then shook his head. "In this case, then I'll send you on your way directly. Although it's hard to search after you're dead, it's about the same." While speaking, Victor's fingertips lit up again. Seeing this, Reed's pupils shrank, and he glanced at the window behind him from the corner of his eye. Then he gritted his teeth, and his figure instantly bounced off the ground and slammed into the window heavily. Boom! Accompanied by the sound of the wall cracking, Reed crashed directly from the window. Accompanied by a strong sense of weightlessness, Reed subconsciously wanted to grab something. At this moment, a strange scene happened. His arm instantly extended infinitely, and he grabbed the railing on the top floor, and at the same time his falling speed also slowed down. At the cracked wall, Victor, who was planning to do something, saw this scene. His eyes froze, and the attack that had been froze and ready to go immediately dispersed from his fingertips. He suddenly changed his mind. He wants to catch the living. If Reed's changes in the ward can be attributed to mutations, then this method of body deformation cannot be explained by simple mutations. Therefore, after seeing this scene, Victor was sure that Reed must have obtained more things in the cosmic storm, but he concealed this information, or he didn't know it. Such a good experimental material cannot just die like this. With this in mind, Victor directly stepped in from the broken wall, suspended in the air, and then walked towards the ground step by step as if descending a staircase. Reed, who landed smoothly, didn't have time to feel the changes in himself. Although he was also surprised, his life is of course the most important right now. He glanced back at the hospital behind him, and this glance almost made Reed's eyes pop out. Victor actually violated the gravity of the Earth and walked towards him step by step. It's as if the gravity of the Earth and the stars is completely useless to him. This is not a simple flight, it is really walking in the air. For a moment, Reed only felt his scalp tingling, and he had a higher awareness of Victor's horror. Not daring to stay any longer, Reed ran towards the distance with his legs apart, causing huge chaos. At this moment, the entire hospital was in a mess because of the two, and there were explosions one after another. Victor, who could fly, and Reed, who was 4 or 5 meters tall, exploded one after another. No matter which one of these, it is enough to make the headlines of the New Times, let alone appearing together. The people fled one after another, causing many stampede incidents. When Reed came from the hospital to the street outside, he indirectly caused one car accident after another. Victor, who was suspended in the air, chased after Reed, and frowned when he saw the huge movement caused by Reed. He has always been low-key, and he hates this feeling of being exposed to the eyes of the world, which makes him feel like a clown on the stage, trying to please everyone. However, after Reed stepped on those long legs, his speed was not slow at all. In addition, he couldn't use more means, so he couldn't catch up with Reed for a while, so he could only hang behind him, watching the situation get bigger and bigger. Shield. Not long after Nick came back, the assistant rushed in before he had time to catch his breath. "Director, it's not good. There are extraordinary people fighting in the urban area. Now the urban area is in chaos." "What?" Nick screamed, and his face instantly became extremely ugly. Can't these people let him take a breather? It wasn't long before the alien incident was resolved, and now there are people making trouble in the downtown area. This is really treating their shield as a display, right? Many thoughts flashed through Nick's mind. At this moment, the phone on the table rang. Hearing the ringing, Nick's face turned ugly again. He didn't need to answer it, he knew who was calling. But the matter has come to this point, he can only bite the bullet and get through the phone. Just as he picked up the phone, as he expected, there was a burst of cursing on the phone. The Minister of Defense greeted his mother directly, and put down his words. If the matter could not be resolved, he would be laid off, which completely ignited the suppressed anger in Nick's heart. After hanging up the phone, Nick looked at the assistant with cannibalistic eyes and said in a low voice, "Call the captain and the others, take action. Also, stare at those two fools, I will screw their heads off myself." "Yes," the assistant responded, and hurriedly left the office. The gloomy Nick was too scary, and he couldn't bear it. Soon, the members of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the military acted together, and quickly cleared the streets according to the advance route of the two Reeds, forming a blockade. On the other side, Reed, who knew nothing, plunged directly into the encirclement. Although Victor noticed the actions of S.H.I.E.L.D., he ignored them. Although it was not his intention to make such a big commotion, right now, nothing is as important as arresting Reed. Soon, Reed, who was running all the way, finally realized that something was wrong. From a long distance, he saw a group of soldiers with live ammunition and everyone from S.H.I.E.L.D. Suddenly, he couldn't help but stop running wildly, his face was full of anxiety. Ever since he realized Victor's horror, he knew that Tony was the only one who could save him in the whole girlie. Therefore, the reason why he has been running wildly in the urban area and making such a big commotion is to get Tony's attention and let him come to save him. But he never thought that before he waited for Tony, he met the official person first. He doesn't think that the official people are here to help him. Thinking about the noise he made, it is more likely that they will deal with him. Thinking of this, Reed became more and more anxious. This situation, where there were wolves and tigers, completely cut off his escape route. And just when Reed was anxious, Tony was at Pot's house at the moment, enjoying Pot's service. After leaving the hospital, he found Potts, who had a rare rest, and lived a two-person world together. In order to prevent being disturbed, he lost his mobile phone. So despite the chaos outside, he was still intoxicated with tenderness, unable to extricate himself. On the First Avenue, Nick looked at the huge figure that stopped in the distance with cold eyes, with a cold light in his eyes. Seeing that the figure in the distance was still not moving, Nick immediately waved his hand, and at that moment, everyone in the military began to press forward. Reed looked at the approaching military, then turned his head to look at Victor, who was getting closer behind him, and a trace of hostility appeared in his eyes instantly. If it were yesterday, he would never have clashed with the official people, but now that he has experienced the betrayal of his friend, and was chased by Victor all the way, his heart has long been filled with anger. As Tony expected, Reed's dark side was gradually unearthed. "It was you who forced me." Roaring in his mouth, Reed's figure instantly rushed up to meet the military. Boom, boom, the sound of heavy footsteps kept ringing, and every time Reed took a step, the ground trembled. Finally, the distance between the two sides was getting closer and closer, and Reed was like a giant war beast, exuding a ferocious aura, which made many soldiers tremble in their gun-holding hands. "Fire!" Nick ordered loudly. Immediately, the tense military personnel opened fire instantly as if they had found a vent. Da da da. The gunshot sounded like a thunderstorm, and an endless metal storm swept towards Reed. Jingle jingle. The bullet landed on Reed's skin, and there was a sound of metal clashing. Apart from making Reed feel a pain, it did not cause any harm at all. Looking at this scene, Nick's expression remained unchanged. He already knew enough about transcendence. The shooting just now was just to calculate Reed's defense power. At the moment, Nick didn't turn his head and said, "How is it? Can Apocalypse 1 penetrate his defense?" Behind him, a S.H.I.E.L.D. scientist looked down at the instrument in his hand and said to himself, "No problem, his defense is much worse than Banner's, and Apocalypse 1 is enough to penetrate his defense." Hearing this, Nick nodded, and waved directly behind him. Immediately, everyone in the military stepped aside, and members of S.H.I.E.L.D., holding strange weapons, stood in front of the queue. The weapons in their hands look as huge as a rocket launcher from a distance, but the front end is in the shape of a needle, which is full of science fiction. This is a new type of laser weapon developed by Nick specifically to deal with Tony's shadow core. He didn't intend to show it so soon, but this time Reed and Victor's behavior completely angered Nick, so he took out this killer weapon. Noisy, noisy. Apocalypse was launched, and a burst of sound waves spread around. Reed, who was running wildly, was caught off guard and was directly hit by Apocalypse. Suddenly, a violent explosion sounded around him. Reed's figure was directly blasted out. Seeing this scene, everyone in S.H.I.E.L.D. became excited. Apocalypse 1 can indeed fight against extraordinary people. With this thing, they won't be helpless against those extraordinary people in the future. Even the corner of Nick's mouth curled into a smile at this moment, obviously very satisfied with the result. However, as the smoke cleared and Reed's figure was revealed, the excited expressions of the crowd stopped abruptly. All I saw was that Reed couldn't find a single wound on his body except that he was completely black. Seeing this, Nick's face darkened instantly. The reason why he wanted to test Reed's physical defense was to allow Apocalypse 1 to make a contribution in one fell swoop and build confidence for everyone in S.H.I.E.L.D. After all, with the increasing number of supernatural beings, S.H.I.E.L.D. was hit one after another, and its morale was almost lost. But now, Reed was unscathed. This not only slapped him in the face, but also knocked the morale of S.H.I.E.L.D. into the abyss again. How is this going? Nick looked downcastly at the researchers behind him, and the researchers from S.H.I.E.L.D. were no longer calm. Impossible, his defense is not so strong, it is impossible to block the attack of Tianchi. Hearing this, Nick didn't say anything, and turned to look at Reed again. Now is not the time to pursue responsibility, the right way is to solve the current troubles. Banna, please, Nick whispered to Banner not far away. Banner nodded, and Steve and others watched from the sidelines. In order to build confidence for the members of S.H.I.E.L.D., Steve and the others did not act immediately. Now, Apocalypse has failed, so they can only make a move. Banner walked out of the crowd and walked towards Reed. As the two sides approached, Banner's body gradually began to swell, tearing his clothes, and finally turned into a green giant. Boom! Without a word, two huge fists collided fiercely. Immediately, Reed's figure was blasted out again, and hit the ground heavily, making a big hole in the ground. It's you. Reed looked at Banner with surprise in his eyes. He really didn't see Banner's appearance clearly before, but now, he sees clearly. When Banner heard this, a hint of doubt flashed across his face. You know me. Yes, my strength comes from you. Reed did not deny it. In an instant, Banner's breath was suffocated, the power coming from him. Are you from Tony? Yes. A deep growl came out of Banner's mouth, and the next second, Banner jumped up high and smashed towards Reed, who was lying on the ground. The strong wind blew the surrounding smoke and dust, and at this moment, Banner was like a god descending from the earth. However, just as he was about to fall on Reed, suddenly Reed's arm extended directly and punched Banner in the face. Banner, who had nowhere to rely on in the air, was immediately sent flying with a punch. Rumble. His body rolled several times on the ground, crushing the ground. At the same time, a bewildered look appeared on his face. Who am I? Where am I? Didn't you say that your ability comes from me? But why would I not know your trick? Banner looked in Reed's direction in confusion, and Reed stood up from the ruins with a wanton smile on his face. He punched Banner just now, and he had already determined that he was not Banner's opponent. No one knows better than him how terrifying Banner's power is. After all, he had studied Banner for a long time, and the other party was lying in front of him like a mouse. If it was before, he must have been beaten, but the scene in the hospital made him realize that he is not the same as before. Tried it, the result, the effect is not bad. Asshole. With a curse in his mouth, Banner got up from the ground and rushed towards Reed again. But the scene just now reappeared. Reed's arm was extended again, and he punched him hundreds of meters away. As a pure melee fighter, Banner has no long-range attack skills, and the charge was interrupted again, and he quickly blocked it. On the battlefield, the two hill-like giants fought fiercely with a distance of hundreds of meters, and it looked like an evenly matched scene. Outside the battlefield, Nick was planning to ask Steve and others to come forward to help, but when he saw Victor appearing in the sky behind Reed, he had to turn his attention to Victor. Although Nick's own strength is not strong, as a person who has dealt with Tony and Rocky successively, Nick is keenly aware of Victor's difficulty. It's just a pure feeling, but he believes in it. Therefore, Nick no longer pays attention to Reed, but focuses all his attention on Victor. Go and deal with that guy together. Be careful, that guy is not simple. Nick said to Steve and the others with a solemn face. Immediately, puzzled expressions appeared on the faces of Steve and the others, especially Thor. He was counseled before facing Tony and Loki, but that doesn't mean he will still counsel others. He, God of war in God's domain, Saul, is invincible. Don't be so dignified, isn't it just that you can fly? Let me solve him. Saul said confidently, and rushed out without waiting for Nick to speak. As a god, flying is a basic ability. Passing over the two stupid big men on the ground, Saul intercepted in front of Victor. Just about to open his mouth to show his strength, but before he could speak, a rolling word came from Victor's mouth. Victor gave Saul a cold look, seeing through his essence, but he didn't care at all. It's just gods, he has seen many and killed many, so that's it. Hearing Victor's roll, Saul was stunned for a moment, and when he came back to his senses, a burst of anger suddenly surged in his heart. He, the majestic god of war in God's domain, doesn't want to lose face. Court death. With an angry shout, Thor's hammer in Thor's hand swung instantly, and a bolt of lightning struck Victor directly. The thunder light exploded in the air, shining silvery white around it. When ordinary people saw this scene, they might lose their minds in an instant. However, Victor still had a cold expression on his face, and he didn't even blink his eyes. The mayfly shakes the tree, beyond its control. After saying that, Victor pointed out that terrifying energy fluctuations condensed on his fingertips, and then burst out instantly to meet the thunder. The moment the two collided, the imaginary explosion scene did not appear, and Victor's energy beam actually absorbed the power of thunder, and then shot towards Saul. Seeing this scene, Saul's face changed, and an unbelievable look appeared on his face instantly. How can it be? His own attack was actually swallowed. This thought flashed in his mind, and then the beam of energy light directly bombarded him. Boom! It wasn't until this time that the sound of the explosion sounded instantly, and Saul's figure flew back upside down, and landed in front of Nick and the others. Seeing this, the faces of Nick and the others changed instantly, and their eyes were full of disbelief. Although Saul has always been crazy, everyone still recognizes Saul's strength. Even in S.H.I.E.L.D., he can be ranked in the top 3. Looking at the whole world, it is the top of the top. But now, Saul was seriously injured in a single blow. This. Everyone didn't know how to describe it for a while. If Tony was here, he would definitely help them add a sentence of horror. How to do? Steve asked with an ugly expression. Nick was also silent for a while. What happened to this world? Why did he keep meeting these perverts? In any case, he must be stopped, Nick said in a heavy tone. Hearing this, Steve nodded his head to express his understanding, and then walked towards Victor. Flint, Eddie and the others quickly followed. They passed through the battle zone between the two of Reed, and neither of them paid any attention to the two stupid big men. Compared with Victor, although Reed is difficult to deal with, it is nothing, as long as Banner can hold him back. Seeing Steve and the others blocking him, Victor shook his head slightly. It's my temper that makes you think I really can't kill people. Just now was just a warning. If you continue to block, then don't blame me. Victor said lightly, his tone as gentle as ever. But no one dared to ignore what he expressed. Holding up the shield, Steve gave him a serious look, and finally said, "It's your duty, obediently stay here." After speaking, Steve flicked the shield in his hand vigorously and launched an attack. As he made a move, Eddie and Flint also made a move in an instant. The yellow sand all over the sky swept towards Victor, and every grain of sand carried astonishing lethality. Eddie turned into venom directly, and rushed towards Victor with a hideous face. Compared with the handsome and gentle Victor, Eddie at this moment is more in line with the villain's temperament. Taking everyone's attacks into his eyes, Victor's face remained unchanged. Man, why don't you listen to advice so much? With a sigh, a terrifying aura emanated from Victor's body instantly. At the same time, a vast force is also gathering around his body. Seeing that the attacks of Steve and the others were about to fall on him, the indifferent Victor finally made a move. He raised his hand and pointed, and a gust of cold breeze blew past, and snowflakes fell in the area meters around him at the center. Frozen, Victor said blankly. When his words fell, the speed of the shield that was about to hit Victor suddenly slowed down, and the ice began to condense on the shield, and finally it was completely frozen and fell in front of Victor. As for the yellow sand that swept towards him, there was no surprise at the moment, and it was gradually frozen with Victor's words. The sand becomes crystal clear in the snow and ice, which is especially pleasing to the eye. The most unlucky of course is Eddie. Both Steve and Flint launched long-range attacks, only he rushed up foolishly thinking of Victor. So, under the ice and snow at this moment, Eddie's body became stiff, and the ice and snow emerged from his body at a speed visible to the naked eye, gradually covering his whole body, completely sealing him in the ice. Seeing this scene, whether it was Steve or Flint, they all took a deep breath at the moment. An indescribable sense of horror welled up in the hearts of the two of them, and a question emerged in their hearts at the same time. Is this guy still human? Are you sure it's not some god pretending to be? You can change the world with just a lift of your hands and feet. In the hot summer, a snowstorm fell directly. This is completely beyond the understanding of the two. For a while, the two stood in a dilemma. To rush forward is obviously to die. Compared with his previous opponents, Victor is more like a god than Thor. To retreat would be to violate one's duty and betray one's beliefs, which was something Steve could hardly accept. In Pot's neighborhood, Tony walked down from the second floor, poured a glass of wine, and sat on the sofa leisurely. He casually picked up the mobile phone that had been thrown aside before, and immediately, a series of push messages appeared on the mobile phone interface. Shock. Such a thing happened in the city of Niu. Quick look. The secrets hidden by the government, the supernatural is by our side. God. There are still such monsters in the world. Looking at the title similar to that of a certain sea in the previous life, the corner of Tony's mouth twitched, but he subconsciously clicked in. Immediately, a series of news about Reed appeared on the mobile phone. It was a photo of Reed who was taken when he escaped from the hospital, and there were also photos about Victor. Seeing this, Tony's eyes were fixed, his fingers quickly swiped the phone screen, and his expression gradually became serious. Just because Nick and the others couldn't recognize Reed doesn't mean that Tony couldn't recognize him either. After all, he helped inject Reed's enhancer. Jarvis, search, where is Reed? Okay sir, searching, confirmed, Mr. Reed is on First Avenue. Hearing this, Tony threw the phone aside, and with a thought, he sank into a shadowy darkness on the ground. At the same time, Peter who was at home, Dr. Octopus who was staying in the laboratory, Norman who was testing the upgraded version of the Green Goblin armor, and the two new gay friends Bucky and Happy appeared behind the figure of the Shadow Ninja at the same time. Seeing the Black Ninja who suddenly appeared behind them, everyone was subconsciously surprised, but they knew that the Black Ninja was an army under Tony's command, so although they were surprised, they didn't resist, and let the Black Ninja put his hands on their shoulders and led them to sink to the ground. There is a building more than 10 meters high next to First Avenue. On the roof, figures of Tony and others appear one after another. Although Tony has not yet fully controlled the Shadow Kingdom, with the assistance of several major Shadow Corps, it is no problem to use the Shadow Kingdom to shuttle briefly. Peter and others looked at the people who suddenly appeared beside them with puzzled faces, not knowing what was going on. But after seeing Tony in front of the crowd, everyone fell silent again. Obviously, Tony was summoning them, so just wait quietly for the order. It's really lively. Tony looked at the two sides fighting below, a cold light flashed in his eyes. Do you really think you have no temper for people who target you one after another? After the words fell, Peter on the side also glanced at the battlefield below, and said a little excitedly, "Are you going to fight?" Hearing this, Tony glanced back at him, and then glanced at everyone one by one. A smile appeared on the corner of his mouth and said, "Yes, everyone, it's time to show your value, let's go and kill. Save that big man, and kill the rest as much as you can." Tony pointed at Reed, but the words he said were full of tyranny. Hearing this, everyone had different reactions, but except for Dr. Octopus, everyone's eyes were full of desire to fight. After all, they are all characters who have fallen into darkness, and no one will reject killing. At that moment, Peter was the first to lose his composure, and jumped directly from the tall building. The spider thread connected the opposite building, and Peter's figure drew a graceful arc in the air. Seeing this, Norman was not to be outdone. He jumped, stepped on the Green Goblin skateboard, and rushed into the battlefield with his signature strange smile. Bucky and Happy leapt recklessly, ignoring the building's height of more than 10 meters, and fell directly to the ground. For a moment, only Dr. Octopus stood there at a loss, not knowing what to do. After all, he has been researching and fighting, and this is the first time. Seeing this, Tony smiled and comforted. Go, it's time to test the performance of your robotic arm. But, I don't know how to fight. Dr. Octopus hesitated. Don't worry, it will help you. Tony pointed to the mechanical arm behind it. Immediately, the mechanical arm seemed to understand Tony's words, and swayed slowly. Seeing this scene, Dr. Octopus gritted his teeth. Well, after finishing speaking, he also jumped down like Harpy and the others, and Tony looked black. Fortunately, the mechanical arm was really strong, and it moved at the same time, grabbed the wall of the building, and took Dr. Octopus down step by step. Otherwise, the famous Dr. Octopus might be getting his box lunch today. The members of the Dark Alliance appeared one after another, instantly attracting the attention of everyone on the battlefield. Nick looked at the Dark Alliance people who appeared, and his face changed instantly. Why are these people here? What does Tony want? While talking, Nick watched the members of the Dark Alliance join the battlefield and change the situation on the battlefield. Happy became as big as a hill, and he punched Banner's body, directly blasting Banner, who was caught off guard. After doing all this, Happy turned his head to look at Reed, who was not far away, and grinned. The battle should be like this. After speaking, Happy chased after him. Norman stepped on the flying skateboard and rushed into the military camp. Pumpkin grenades were dropped one after another as if they didn't want money. Terrible explosions sounded, and large numbers of military soldiers were killed. With Norman's signature weird smile, he has almost become the nightmare of military soldiers at this moment. Peter, who was the first to attack, found Flint at this moment. He has never forgotten this guy. It's just that Flint has been hiding in S.H.I.E.L.D. And Bucky, no surprise, met his friend Steve again, and continued to love and kill each other. However, after merging with the symbiote, Steve's strength has greatly increased. Bucky, who used to be able to fight against him, is no longer his opponent at all, so he was blasted as soon as he went up. Fortunately, at the critical moment, Dr. Octopus joined the battle and teamed up with him to form a 2-on-1 situation, which suppressed Steve. Not far away, Victor, who was planning to continue attacking the two of Steve, was stunned when he saw the changes. The situation changed so quickly that he was a little caught off guard, so he couldn't help but stop what he was doing. However, with his keen observation skills, he noticed where the members of the Dark Alliance appeared, and turned his head to look in the direction of the building. After a while, I saw a figure looking down at him from above, like the King of Gods looking down on the ants on the ground. Seeing this, Victor frowned subconsciously, and his expression, which had always been indifferent, became serious at this moment. He felt threatened from Tony, which meant that Tony was very strong. The four eyes met, and the two stared at each other from the air. The eyes of the two collided in midair, while Tony was thinking about Victor's identity. He has never met Victor, but the one who can find Reed should be the villain who appeared in the movie. And among the Fantastic Four, there is only one biggest villain, Dr. Doom Victor. A peerless powerhouse comparable to Ancient One, Thanos. However, if it is really Dr. Doom himself, everyone in S.H.I.E.L.D. and Reed will definitely not be able to persist until this time, and the entire army has already been wiped out. So, either there is something wrong with Victor himself, or the current him is not his real body. No matter which one it is, it means that the current Victor is not invincible. Thinking about this clearly, Tony immediately let go of the worries in his heart. Immediately, the driving force dragged his figure down the tall building step by step, and walked towards Victor. This scene is exactly the same as the scene when Victor walked out of the hospital, but the abilities used between the two are different. Who are you? Looking at Tony approaching, Victor took the initiative to ask. This was the first time he took the initiative to ask the opponent's name. Neither Saul before nor Steve later got this qualification. Obviously, this is Victor's recognition of Tony's strength. My name is Tony, a rich man. Tony said in a calm tone, with a very indifferent attitude, which did not match his personality that always liked to recruit villains. It wasn't that Tony suddenly changed his gender, but he knew very well that it was absolutely impossible for a person like Victor to surrender to him, so he naturally didn't want to waste his expressions and saliva. Interesting self-introduction. Why, you want to stop me? Victor's expression returned to indifference, and there was a hint of arrogance in his tone. Stop, can't talk about it. I just want to see how strong a strong person at your level is. If I can, I will kill you by the way. Tony said lightly, as if he was talking about a small matter. It's not that he insists on being an enemy of Victor, but that he knows that Victor can't let Reed go. For a person like him, once he has decided on something, he must do it. The same is true for Tony. This is called the commonality of the strong, and there is no room for resistance from others. Therefore, unless Reed is given up, it is almost doomed to live with Victor. But how could Tony give up, let alone talk about his pride and not allow him to bow his head? Reed's value alone was enough for Tony to keep him. Not to mention, Reed is also about system rewards. Whoever dares to stop himself from getting rewards is his enemy. As the saying goes, the words are not speculative, and after Tony's voice fell, Victor stopped talking, but there was a murderous look in his eyes. Raising his finger, terrifying energy fluctuations gathered at Victor's fingertips, and the energy beam containing terrifying lethality broke through the shackles of his fingertips again and hit Tony. At the same time, 2 laser beams appeared in Tony's eyes, the power of the pig charm was activated, and collided fiercely with the beam of energy light. A violent explosion sounded, shaking all directions. Just when the energy attacks of the two collided, the sky was filled with snow again, and the temperature within 100 meters dropped rapidly, exceeding 0 in a blink of an eye, and the snowflakes began to condense on Tony's body. But at this moment, a scorching flame erupted from Tony's body in an instant. The terrifying high temperature melted the ice and snow, and the ice and snow covering a range meters also quickly turned into steam at this moment. Below the two, the venom was thawed, and consciousness returned again, but before he could catch his breath, the air temperature was getting higher and higher, causing him to let out a scream, and his body began to gradually melt. Burst! An icy shout rang out from Victor's mouth, and suddenly a mysterious force acted on Tony's surroundings. It was the magic and mysterious explosion that Dr. Doom was good at, which could trigger the collision of dark particles in the void, thus triggering an explosion. A terrifying shock wave appeared around Tony, sweeping towards him. The venom at the center of the battle was affected by the way, and was directly blasted out. After landing, the seriously injured Venom let out a laugh of escape in an instant. Although he looked miserable, his life was saved, otherwise he would be completely melted by the high temperature sooner or later if he stayed in the battle center. After laughing, he looked up at the two people in the sky, with awe in his eyes. Having seen the strength of the two of them completely shattered the pride in his heart. The strength he has always been complacent about is nothing in front of top figures like Tony and the two. Let alone a head-to-head confrontation, even the aftermath of the battle between the two is not something he can bear. At this time, the smoke and dust from the explosion dissipated, gradually revealing Tony's figure. He was still floating in the air, his body remained unchanged, and even the folds on his clothes remained the same as before. Seeing this scene, a gleam of light flashed in Victor's eyes, piercing through the mystery. In his eyes, he could clearly see a transparent air wall blocking Tony's body, forming a barrier and resisting the explosion, just like the mysterious force field he used before. For a while, he didn't continue to do anything. He has already used the strongest means he can use now, but he still can't help Tony, and it doesn't make any sense to continue. In the same way, Tony didn't make any more moves, and the fight against his opponent was meaningless at all. Since Victor didn't intend to continue, he was happy to do so. After this battle, Tony also realized his own shortcomings. He has many methods and is very strong, but he lacks the one-shot method, which is commonly known as the ultimate move. This made him, who was a little slack at first, feel a sense of urgency in his heart again. He must continue to strengthen his strength. Those people are all your subordinates. Suddenly, Victor spoke. Tony didn't know what he meant, but he didn't bother to deny it, and nodded directly. Yes, give Reed to me, and I'll let them go. One person, I think, should not be compared with a group of people. Why, are you so confident that you can go beyond me to deal with them? Tony asked in surprise. Victor shook his head. Your strength is not bad enough to stop me. I'm not alone, though. After finishing speaking, Victor smiled mysteriously, and immediately chanted a mysterious spell, and at the same time a huge magic circle appeared in front of him. The magic circle exuded an evil aura, and under Victor's urging, a huge portal suddenly appeared on the ground. The portal was engraved with demon patterns, and when it was fully opened, Tony saw a lava world through the portal. Where is this? Tony asked, frowning. Victor didn't hesitate to answer. This is lava hell, the place where lava demons live. Victor explained casually. Soon there were violent roars, and a 3-meter-tall lava demon with a body made of rocks leapt out of the portal. His body was filled with the texture of flames, and the rocks on his body were even more fiery red, and a faint sulfur smell emanated from him. As if smelling the free air, the roar of the lava demon gradually became excited. In just a short moment, lava demons one after another continuously jumped out of the portal, occupying the ground below. At the same time, Victor's voice sounded again, and there was a hint of complacency in his tone at this moment. How about it? You still have a chance to choose. Although these guys are useless, they should be enough to deal with your subordinates. Give Reed to me, and I will retreat. This is your last chance. Listening to his words and seeing his smug expression, Tony's mouth suddenly evoked a weird smile. Summoned creatures, I have them too, why don't you take a look at mine? After finishing speaking, Tony had a thought, and suddenly a large darkness gathered under him, and one after another black shadow trolls came out of the darkness, 3 meters tall, stout figure, and dazzling scarlet eyes under the darkness. Compared with the demon summoned by Victor, the shadow troll is like a dark creature coming out of the abyss. In particular, compared to the chaotic scene of the lava demons, the black shadow trolls are arranged in an orderly manner, and they advance and retreat with a certain degree. If there is a comparison, it is the difference between the regular army and the miscellaneous army, which completely compares the lava giants. Looking at this scene, an ugly look climbed onto Victor's cheeks, thinking about the threat he had just made, and looking at the current scene, it was simply a large-scale social death scene. Even with Victor's temperament, he might not be able to help but become a little angry. Tear them apart. A loud shout came from Victor's mouth, and under his order, the lava demon roared and rushed towards the shadow troll. Watching their attack, a disdainful smile appeared on the corner of Tony's mouth. He snapped his fingers, then pointed forward, and said calmly, "Let him tear it apart." After the words fell, the black shadow troll went directly to meet them. In an instant, the two legions collided like tides, causing the earth to vibrate continuously. The lava demon not only has a hard body, but also has the power of flames. Each head is comparable to a transcendent like happy, and even stronger. In contrast, although the black shadow trolls are invincible in strength and strong in body, they are weaker than the lava demon in terms of lethality without extraordinary strength. Therefore, only 2 black shadow trolls can match a lava demon on the battlefield. However, the Black Shadow Corps is not known for their abilities. Their greatest ability is immortality. The Black Shadow Troll that was killed in the last second was resurrected in the Shadow Kingdom in the next second, and entered the battlefield again. In such a continuous consumption confrontation, it seemed that the lava demon had the upper hand, but it was fighting less and less. Although Victor continued to summon lava demons to replenish his troops, as time went by, the entire battlefield was gradually occupied by black shadow trolls, and the number of lava demons became less and less. In the end, with the last lava demon falling to the ground, the legion summoned by Victor was completely defeated. An indescribable depression emanated from Victor, and he did not continue to summon. He could see that no matter how many demons he summoned, unless they were demons with overwhelming power, no matter how many he summoned, they would not be enough to fight the Black Shadow Troll. At that moment, Victor gave Tony a vicious look, and said indignantly, "You have won this game, but I will come back to find you." After finishing speaking, Victor put away the magic circle, turned around and wanted to leave. But at this moment, a mocking smile appeared on Tony's face. "Want to leave? How much magic power do you have left?" As soon as these words came out, Victor's face suddenly changed, and his originally calm figure accelerated instantly and wanted to leave this place. But the moment he fled, the power of the rabbit charm on Tony was activated. Immediately, within the blink of an eye, Tony appeared behind Victor, with his palm lightly resting on Victor's shoulder, and the scorching flame spread from his palm in an instant. Pong! The flames ignited when they encountered objects, and spread directly to Victor's whole body, and a scorched smell radiated from him. Suddenly, Victor's expression changed suddenly, and he wanted to mobilize his power to suppress the flames on his body. But with Tony's steady supply of strength, his resistance was quickly extinguished, and death filled Victor's heart. At that moment, Victor turned his head to look at Tony, with murderous intent in his eyes, and said, "I'll come to you again when I get out of hell." As soon as the words fell, the flames engulfed him completely, and his body was directly burned to ashes. The breeze blew, and the ashes drifted between the sky and the earth with the wind. Tony stood proudly in the air, and said calmly to himself, "I'm waiting for you to come." After speaking, Tony turned and looked at the battlefield behind him with an indifferent expression. Although Victor is dead, from what he left just now, it is obvious that this is not his real body. And a clone can be not too different from the current self, which shows how terrifying Victor's real body is. But Tony is not afraid. It has only been a long time since he came from a mortal. He believes that when he meets Victor next time, he will not say that he will suppress him backhanded, but he will definitely not be afraid of him, so his threat is just a joke to Tony. It's time to end. Looking at the various battlefields not far away, Tony whispered to himself. Immediately, his figure slowly drifted in the direction of S.H.I.E.L.D., as if a god was patrolling his territory. And as he moved forward, black shadows began to emerge on the street, black ninjas, black claws, black night bats, black trolls, black warriors, and in just a short moment, the boundless black shadow army completely enveloped the entire First Avenue. People from S.H.I.E.L.D. and the military watched this scene, and boundless fear suddenly rose from his heart, and everyone's faces were filled with fear. Even the extraordinary people who were fighting stopped one after another. Steve and others watched this scene in horror, and everyone in the Dark Alliance swallowed subconsciously. They have seen the Shadow Corps, but they have never seen such a large number of Shadow Corps. It can be said that if you look around, wherever you look, there is darkness. Such a scene made everyone tremble and subconsciously feel fear. Among the crowd, Nick watched this scene tremblingly. When his eyes touched Tony in the sky, he immediately let out a loud roar, "Tony, stop." Hearing the sound, Tony didn't even look at him, but just looked down at everyone below him indifferently, and waved his hand casually. "Kill." Tony's voice was not high-pitched, but it fell on everyone's ears as if the gods were judging them, making the hearts of the people below tremble wildly. Especially when the Shadow Corps rushed to attack, everyone felt a mountain of pressure. The black shadow night bats were flying in the sky, and beams of energy were emitted from their hands, falling into the crowd below, causing bursts of explosions. The Sharp Blade Legion kept jumping forward on the tall buildings on both sides of the road. Their sharp claws gleamed with a cold edge, falling into the crowd directly caused bursts of blood. The Black Shadow Troll charged head-on. With its tall body and terrifying defense, it became a nightmare on the frontal battlefield. It easily smashed the soldiers of the army into meatloaf, and every punch and kick made the earth tremble. As for the Black Shadow Warrior and the Black Shadow Ninja, both of them are constantly walking in the shadows, either they don't move or they will kill if they move. Blood blooms in the air, killing blooms in the sun, and no elite soldier can resist the army from darkness. Crashing and howling became the main theme of the battlefield. Under killing, all beings are equal. Behind the army, Nick stared blankly at the scene in front of him. His whole body seemed to lose his soul, his face was extremely pale. On the battlefield, Steve and the others also came back to their senses at this moment, watching the Black Shadow army that set off the killing, one by one roared and rushed forward, resisting with all their strength. However, when manpower is exhausted, the Black Shadow Corps represents the general trend at this moment. How can people compete with the general trend? Besides, the people of the Dark Alliance are not idlers. Following Steve and the others, the people of the Dark Alliance also greeted them one after another. In the crowd, Flint kept setting off wild sand, resisting the impact of the Shadow Corps. Suddenly, Peter's figure suddenly appeared behind him and punched him in the back. Boom! Huge force penetrated his body, and a piece of sand slipped from his chest. In the sky, Norman arrived quickly on a skateboard, still smiling strangely, and then he accurately threw 2 pumpkin grenades into the hole in Flint's chest. Seeing this, Peter pulled away instantly, and the 2 former enemies completed a wave of perfect cooperation. Perceiving this scene, Flint's expression changed drastically, and a horrified scream came out of his mouth, "No!" The next second, there was a bang. The pumpkin grenade exploded in Flint's body, and the terrifying electromagnetic pulse directly tore his body apart. Flint's bones were gone in an instant, and the yellow sand that made up his body was completely evaporated in the explosion and ceased to exist. At this point, Flint, whose fate was rewritten and joined S.H.I.E.L.D., died in battle. On the other side, when the members of S.H.I.E.L.D. are constantly resisting under the leadership of Steve, Venom is constantly fleeing. He is the only defector among the many supernatural beings of S.H.I.E.L.D. He is not a decent person at all. He can follow the justice in the host's heart and be a good person without threatening his own life, but when his own survival is threatened, justice is nothing. So, when he saw Tony start to kill, he didn't hesitate at all, just turned around and ran away. With his speed, it is not easy to escape the siege of the Shadow Core, but it is not difficult. But when he was fleeing, Dr. Octopus was staring at him. As a scientific madman, Dr. Octopus noticed the difference in Venom from the very beginning. Alien life like him is undoubtedly fatal to researchers like Dr. Octopus. Therefore, in the chaotic crowd, Dr. Octopus has always kept his track firmly. The 4 mechanical arms are like 4 wheels at the moment, leading Dr. Octopus to chase the Venom constantly. Soon, Venom, who hadn't escaped from the encirclement of the Shadow Core, was intercepted by Dr. Octopus. There was a sound of piercing through the air, and the 2 mechanical arms pierced the air at an extremely fast speed and attacked the Venom. Sensing the movement, Venom turned around without thinking, punched, and collided heavily with a mechanical arm. Boom! There was a loud noise, and all the terrifying force fell on Venom's body, smashing him directly into the ground. The next second, another mechanical arm struck, directly piercing his body, pinning him to the ground. Ow! There was a weird roar, and Venom struggled violently, but the mechanical arm was like a fixed screw. No matter how hard he struggled, he couldn't break free. Immediately, Venom, who sensed the threat, couldn't care about anything else, and forcibly broke away from Eddie, the host, and turned into a puddle of liquid to escape. This change of scene also made Dr. Octopus dumbfounded. He didn't expect things to turn out like this. Glancing at Eddie, who was completely dead on the ground due to the detachment of the Venom, Dr. Octopus pulled out his mechanical arm and quickly pursued towards the Venom. Unfortunately, with its super vitality, although Venom was damaged one after another under the attack of Dr. Octopus, it always maintained an extremely fast escape speed. If there were no accidents, Venom's escape was a foregone conclusion. Unfortunately, he forgot that in the sky, Tony was looking down on the entire battlefield like a god, and everything on the battlefield was under his gaze. Just when Venom was about to escape and ascend to heaven, an irresistible force suddenly enveloped him. In the next second, he got off the ground and floated towards the sky. Fizz! There were sharp hisses, and Venom looked at Tony in the sky, and made a sound of horror. Having personally experienced Tony's horror, he knows very well that once he falls into Tony's hands, the only thing waiting for him is death. Unfortunately, the huge difference in strength doomed all his resistance to be futile. In the end, the Venom fell into Tony's hands. And Tony just glanced at him, and a flame ignited in his hand, and then with a piercing hissing sound, the Venom was burned into gas. When Dr. Octopus saw this, a pity flashed in his eyes. He still wanted to study it, and Tony's voice was also ringing in his ears at this moment. Don't worry, there are still many such life forms, and I will get you another one later. Hearing this, Dr. Octopus smiled, no longer struggled, turned around and continued to kill. In the distance, Nick saw with his own eyes the extraordinary members of S.H.I.E.L.D. continue to die in battle, and his whole body panicked. If all the extraordinary people died, then S.H.I.E.L.D. would be completely destroyed. He would not allow such a situation to happen. At that moment, Nick held a trumpet and shouted loudly, "Get out! Everyone get out!" Steve and the others, who were in danger in the crowd, were ordered to take a look at the surrounding scene. A trace of sadness flashed in their eyes, knowing that there was nothing they could do to recover. Staying, nothing can change except death, so they didn't refute Nick's order, and began to retreat one after another. And Nick's words also caught Tony's attention. At that moment, Tony's figure flashed, and the next second he appeared directly beside Nick. Seeing this scene, Nick's heart skipped a beat, and he couldn't help but feel the will to die. He didn't speak at the moment, but just looked at Tony to see what he wanted to do. Tony's hand landed on Nick's neck at some point, lifting him up little by little. "Where are my things?" Tony asked indifferently. After the words fell, Nick immediately realized what Tony was talking about, and said hoarsely with difficulty, "I'm still in S.H.I.E.L.D. I'm getting impatient. I think you don't want me to take it myself." Thump! Tony threw Nick on the ground casually, and said slowly, "One more piece of advice. Don't think that you are still alive because of the existence of that woman, just because you are still so useful to me. Don't think too much, get out." Watching Nick and others leave, Tony did not continue to order the hunt. But at this moment, on the First Avenue, except for the people of the Dark Alliance, there is no living person, and all of them have turned into corpses. The scene of stumped limbs and broken arms made people's hearts tremble. Even after the members of the Dark Alliance who had personally participated in everything calmed down, they were still frightened. They mainly targeted Steve and others, and didn't kill too many ordinary people, so these corpses were all masterpieces of the Shadow Corps. Thinking of this, everyone couldn't help but subconsciously glanced at the surrounding Black Shadow Corps. It just so happened that the Black Shadow Corps also cast their scarlet eyes on the people of the Dark Alliance, as if they were their next killing targets. Suddenly, everyone in the Dark Alliance couldn't help feeling their scalps tingle. Fortunately, at this moment, Tony opened his mouth to break the weird atmosphere. "Reed, are you okay?" Tony's voice was not enthusiastic, but it moved Reed in the crowd. "Boss, it's okay." Reed's tone was much more respectful than before, if he only regarded Tony as the boss before. But after this time, Tony led people to rescue him, and even went to war with the authorities for him, which completely made him return to his heart, treating Tony as the existence of the Lord. Seeing this scene, the people around were also in complicated moods. They gathered by Tony's side for various reasons. In their opinion, the two parties used the relationship more, but this time, they saw Tony's sincerity. Tony really treats them as his own people, not tools that are thrown away when they are used up. All of a sudden, the relationship among the Dark Alliance became inexplicably warmer than before. Even Norman, who joined the Dark Alliance under threat, looked at Tony with more approval. Regarding the changes in everyone's hearts, Tony naturally didn't know, he just did what he should do. After confirming that Reed was fine, he also arranged follow-up matters. "The Shadow Corps sweeps the battlefield. Go and clean up the surveillance around you." "It is good." Everyone responded in unison, and scattered away one after another. At the same time, the Shadow Corps also acted quickly, dragging the corpses on the ground into the Kingdom of Shadows to destroy them. This approach gives people a feeling of deception, but it is a necessary process. Tony will continue to live in this country, so the rules of the game still have to be followed. Although many people saw him kill, as long as there is no direct evidence, no matter how many people saw him, it would be useless. Because even if 1 people testify against him, he can still get 10 people to prove his innocence. As for what the truth is, no one will care, as long as everyone can get by, then this matter will come to an end. This is capital, even if the country is powerful, it must give way to capital. A free country, Tony found that he gradually fell in love with this country. And while Tony was cleaning up the scene, the news spread along with the withdrawn shield. Thousands of people died, most of them were military soldiers, and the news could not be concealed at all. For a moment, the entire upper class of the United States was shocked. The government departments and the military chiefs took action one after another. Some people clamored to sanction Tony, and even proposed to directly use the army to suppress Stark Industries. However, more people related to Stark Industries refuted their proposal and kept arguing with them. In Potts' room, Potts, who was resting, received a call from the upper echelon of the United States. Her originally tired face instantly became shrewd and capable. "Did Tony kill someone?" "Impossible, this is absolutely slander." "Want to suppress Stark Industries by force?" "Summon all the congressmen who have relations with us, initiate a parliament, and sanction those fools." "Who in the White House asked about this matter?" "Don't worry about it, I will find someone to shut him up." Orders came out of Potts' mouth in an orderly manner. Facing the pressure from the upper echelon of the U.S., she didn't even think about it, and directly stood by Tony's side. After hanging up the phone, Potts did not rest, and continued to make one call after another, mobilizing all the connections of Stark Industries. In addition, she has also mobilized the network of Aoshi Group. As the major shareholder of Aoshi Group, Tony has the ability to mobilize these networks by exercising the authority of the major shareholder on her behalf. Soon, under the joint efforts of the two major groups, all remarks against Tony and Stark Industries were suppressed. The minds of the various military forces who had been clamoring before have also shut up at this moment. Everyone was taken aback by the joint offensive of the two major groups. So far, the event that should have caused a disturbance has quietly subsided like this. This is the horror of the Chable. Manipulating the parliament and playing with the regime is a routine phenomenon in the upper echelons of the United States. Of course, it was because Tony made too much noise that caused such a big disturbance. If not for the fact that too many people died and the military was involved, no one would care about how many people died. Shield, at this moment, a dark cloud hangs over the whole Shield. From Nick to ordinary members of Shield, everyone is filled with depression. The operation failed, and Shield suffered heavy losses, so they reported the matter. As a result, the higher-ups directly suppressed this matter. All of this made everyone in Shield feel confused. In the conference room, Steve looked at Nick with an angry face and asked loudly, "Why is this happening? Why is no one in charge of this? Tony has killed so many people, and the military has killed so many people. Is there no one to sanction him?" Steve growled in confusion, and the others looked at Nick angrily, wanting him to give an explanation. The deaths of Flint and Venom filled their hearts with anger, and now the government's inaction has made them even more angry. Looking at the expressions of the crowd and listening to Steve's questioning, a self-deprecating smile appeared on Nick's face. "What do you do? Do you have any evidence to prove that he killed someone? I asked someone to adjust the surrounding surveillance, and he cleaned it all up. There is no evidence. Even if all of us Shield testify against him, he can make more people admit that he is not guilty." "Captain, times have changed. Now it is the world of the plutocrats, and it is no longer the world of the people of the United States." After speaking, Nick closed his eyes tiredly and stopped looking at the crowd. In previous life movies, why did Shield become more and more powerful over time? In addition to the frequent occurrence of extraordinary events, which increased the authority of Shield, it was also because Tony was also a member of Shield. With the support of the Chable, Shield's power has grown, and it has even gradually escaped the control of the upper echelons of the United States. But now, Tony did not join Shield, and SHIELD's operations have continued to fail, with no support, and things often mess up, which has completely led to the continuous compression of SHIELD's authority. Now, being oppressed by the Chable, he doesn't even have the ability to resist. As the director of Shield, Nick is the most uncomfortable one. Especially the few words that Tony said to him before, are still echoing in his ears at this moment. Tony really dared to kill him. Even if Tony knows the existence of Captain Marvel. Come to think of it, if Tony really wanted to kill him, would he have a chance to pull out his pager? Even if we got in touch, when Captain Marvel, who didn't know which planet he was on, came back, the grass on his grave would be 3 feet high. Seeing Nick's appearance, Steve, who was about to say something, opened his mouth, but couldn't say a word in the end. The others also sighed in unison. Although they were unwilling, they knew that this was the only way to go. They can't beat Tony outside the rules, and they are not Tony's opponents within the rules. They have no other way but to bow their heads. In Potts' residence, there was a sound of the door opening. Tony walked into the room, and as soon as he came to the living room, Tony saw Potts sitting on the sofa in the living room. An embarrassed smile crept across Tony's face. "Why did you get up and stop resting?" Hearing this, Potts turned his head and glanced at him, then rolled his eyes. "It's rare that our Mr. Tony still remembers me. I woke up and found that I was the only one. I thought I was abandoned like those garbage." Hearing this, Tony coughed dryly. The self-confident man suddenly felt a little guilty at this moment. The garbage in Potts' mouth is naturally not garbage in the usual sense, but the female companion he brought back. At that moment, a smile appeared on Tony's face, and he sat beside Potts and took her into his arms. "What are you thinking? How can those people compare to you?" Regarding Tony's move, Potts did not resist, but fell into his arms, with a trace of worry on his face. "Tony, I don't know what you are doing now, but, such a dangerous thing, don't do it next time, okay? You have so much money, you can pay someone to do it, why do you have to do it yourself?" Potts' topic jumped quickly, but Tony grasped the meaning of her words in an instant. Obviously, she already knew what happened on First Avenue. Looking at the worry on her face, a softness flashed in Tony's eyes. "You know everything. Don't worry, no one can hurt me. But don't worry, in the future, I will definitely not do it myself, I promise. Potts nodded silently, and pecked Tony's lips lightly. A peaceful and warm atmosphere filled the room. This feeling made Tony intoxicated, and for a while, the hostility accumulated in his heart due to the killing dissipated a lot. The peaceful days passed in a blink of an eye for a month. The former playboy is back again. Spending money and picking up girls has become Tony's greatest pleasure, and the female companions he brings home every night are not the same. If Tony's body hadn't been what it used to be, according to his posture of singing and singing every night, his body would have been unable to bear it. And while Tony was enjoying life, his house was bombed again. 3 helicopter fighter jets dropped bombs on his seaside villa, nearly destroying it to rubble. The reason why I say almost is because there is Rocky in the seaside villa. After noticing the movement outside the villa, Rocky used the illusion to influence the helicopter pilot and dropped the bomb on the sea. Although it caused an explosion, it did not affect the villa. As for the 3 helicopters, they were wiped out by Loki at the same time the bomb was dropped and completely disappeared from the world. When Tony got the news, his whole face was stunned, and he didn't expect such a thing to happen at all. He had been spending the night at the seaside villa before, but because he was too noisy, he was kicked out by Loki. After all, no one wants to listen to others making people every night. After getting the news, Tony rushed back to the villa as soon as possible. Villa, living room. Looking at Loki sitting on the sofa, Tony asked curiously, "What's going on?" Hearing this, Loki shrugged his shoulders, expressing that he didn't know. He has become a scientific research fan and has been researching artificial intelligence for a while. If he hadn't noticed the sudden attack on the villa, he might not have walked out of the underground research room. Seeing this, Tony could only change to another person to ask, "Jarvis, did you find anything?" "Sir, yes, those 3 combat helicopters were traded to the military by Stark Industries at the beginning of this year, LM models." After the words fell, Tony frowned slightly. Helicopters from the military revenge. As soon as this thought came to his mind, Tony threw it out of his mind. It's been a month, and the military shouldn't wait until this time to retaliate. Besides, they don't have the courage to measure them, so the military's retaliation can basically be ruled out. And at this moment, Jarvis' voice suddenly sounded. "Sir, I just found a piece of news that I think may be helpful to you." After speaking, Jarvis projected an image on the wall. A middle-aged man with a gloomy temperament appeared on the TV, with sunglasses on the bridge of his nose, and arrogantly announced a terrorist declaration, intending to carry out terrorist attacks on the United States, and announced a series of attack locations, including the address of Tony's villa. Looking at this scene, a strange look flashed across Tony's face. This scene seemed familiar. It seemed to have appeared in the 3rd movie of Iron Man in the previous life. Suddenly, Tony couldn't help but fell into deep thought, thinking about what the 3rd part of Iron Man was about. It's a pity that after some contemplation, he didn't get any more useful information. He only remembered a few key words: pioneering technology, extremis virus. As for more information, sorry, almost forgot. Interesting, are you targeting me on purpose? Tony was talking to himself, then turned to look at Loki. "How about it, can you use the Rubik's Cube to lock that guy's position?" Tony pointed to humanity on the projection. In one fell swoop before, S.H.I.E.L.D. was completely terrified, and Nick sent the cosmic Rubik's Cube over the next day. Although this thing is very precious, it is not very useful for Tony to hold it now, so he simply handed it over to Loki for him to study and use. Just like the soul gem on Loki's scepter, he didn't snatch it. Listening to Tony's words, Loki nodded. "No problem, although it can't fully exert its power, it is still no problem to shuttle and lock. In that case, let's go and see what the hell this guy is," Tony said with a smile. Loki also laughed, then stood up from the sofa, raised his hand, and immediately, the cosmic Rubik's Cube appeared in front of Loki. Under the urging of Loki, he directly locked the position of the man in the projection, and then opened a space door with a height of 1 person. Seeing this, Tony and Loki walked in without hesitation, and the Rubik's Cube disappeared instantly. Eagle Country, in a manor. A portal suddenly opened, and the 2 of Tony walked out. The telekinetic force radiated from Tony, covering the entire manor in an instant. For a while, all the scenes in the manor were lost in Tony's mind. There were no strict guards, and no danger was found. Except for the gloomy middle-aged man who was still declaring his terrorist declaration in a villa in the manor, there was absolutely no hint of a terrorist lair here. Let's go and see who this guy is. Tony greeted with a smile. Loki raised his legs to follow, and soon, the two came outside a room. As soon as the thought power moved, Tony directly cut off the live broadcast equipment in the room, and then opened the door and entered. The middle-aged man in the room panicked when he saw the two of Tony suddenly appearing in front of him. Who are you? With a trembling tone, he looked at Tony, the two strangers who broke into the house without permission, who still had the slightest arrogance on TV. You just raided my house and now you're asking who am I? With a playful smile on Tony's face, he kept looking at the man. Physically weak, without extraordinary abilities, but at the level of ordinary people, cowardly, timid, completely does not meet the standards of terrorist armed forces. With just one glance, Tony saw through the guy in front of him. Generally speaking, he is just an ordinary person, with nothing worth caring about. At this moment, the man was stunned for a moment when he heard Tony's words, and he seemed to realize something in the next second, and he was completely panicked. Are you from the US government? Misunderstanding, all misunderstandings, I am just acting, I am not a terrorist. As he spoke, the man quickly raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. Seeing this, Tony naturally didn't mind pulling the tiger's skin, and immediately said with a serious face, Say, who ordered you to do this? I don't know. It was a gentleman who gave me a lot of money to do it. He said he wanted to ask me to act. As an actor, I naturally couldn't refuse. The man said quickly with a crying tone. For fear of speaking slowly, Tony pulled out a pistol and shot him in the head. After all, that's how American movies are played. And Tony looked at him, although he didn't fully believe what he said, but he believed it. This guy looked like he couldn't lift his shoulders or hands, and he was completely unqualified for the job of a terrorist. However, he didn't let him go, but carefully questioned all the information he wanted to know, almost breaking him. After confirming that he had squeezed out all the information this guy knew, Tony let him go, turned around and looked at Loki and said, Let's go. Loki, who had been watching from the sidelines, nodded, summoned the cosmic Rubik's Cube again, opened the space door, and the two of them stepped directly into it and left. Seaside Villa. With the appearance of the two of Tony, Jarvis' voice also sounded. Welcome back, gentlemen. Hearing this, Tony frowned and said with a smile, Jarvis, your intelligence level is getting higher and higher. It seems that you have gained a lot in this period of time. Thanks to Mr. Rocky, I recently upgraded myself again, which is more perfect than before. Jarvis spoke eloquently with his answers, and Tony didn't continue to ask on this question. Instead, the topic changed. Let me tell you some information, and you can help me search for the existence of this person. Okay, sir. Jarvis responded immediately, and Tony began to dictate the information interrogated from Yingguonen's mouth. He didn't know the specific identity of the person behind the scenes, but he had seen the appearance of the person behind the scenes. Under Tony's threat, he described the appearance of the person behind the scenes in great detail. For ordinary people, even if they know this, it is not easy to find the person behind the scenes. But with Jarvis' help, it wasn't too difficult for Tony. Ding, searching. On the wall projection, photos flashed by one. Jarvis, who was connected to the US database, could almost retrieve the information of most people in the US. Looking at the flashing photos, Tony was not in a hurry, poured a glass of wine for himself and Loki, and then sat silently on the sofa and waited. After 10 minutes, suddenly, the fast flashing photo projection stopped, and 3 men appeared on the wall, and Jarvis's voice sounded at the same time. Sir, according to the information you provided, there are only 3 targets in the database that match the information. Ordinary citizen, Mr. Ira. Founder of AIM, Mr. Killian. Government clerk, Mr. Harder. Jarvis introduced the identities and backgrounds of the 3 people, while Tony's eyes circled around the photos of the 3 people, and at the same time, a memory that had been forgotten deep in his mind was also recalled by him. Many years ago, Killian approached his predecessor and wanted to cooperate with him. But the predecessor was arrogant and looked down on this guy at all, so although he agreed to him, he let this guy go and didn't go at all. The next day, Killian approached Stark Industries and questioned his predecessor why he missed the appointment, but he was severely ridiculed by his predecessor and he was kicked out. This was just a trivial matter for the predecessor, and he had long forgotten about it. If he hadn't seen Killian's photo, Tony would not have remembered it. After all, a person's memory is as vast as smoke. What you read, hear, and forget every day will all settle in your mind. Only under certain opportunities will you recall the forgotten memories. Shaking his head helplessly, Tony didn't know how to evaluate his predecessor's behavior style. Although he is a genius, but in terms of worldly sophistication, he is really bad. Perhaps, this is the real genius. However, now the predecessor is him, and he must bear the burden of what the predecessor has done. Check, where is Killian now? Tony ordered casually. In the next second, Jarvis' voice suddenly sounded. Sorry, sir, Mr. Killian's whereabouts cannot be found. At the end of the sentence, Tony frowned, but didn't say much. Although Jarvis's ability is powerful, his scope of activities is limited to the internet. If someone deliberately blocks his news, it's normal if he can't find it. Only in this way, Tony's idea of taking the initiative to attack was shattered. No matter what grievances Killian has with his predecessor, now that he has accepted this grievance, Tony will naturally not show mercy. If he could find out his specific location, Tony wouldn't mind pushing this guy with violence. However, things backfired, and Jarvis couldn't find his location, which made Tony's plan to go straight to Wonglong completely aborted. Okay, since you can't find it, forget it. However, pay close attention to the movement on the internet. It is impossible for this guy to make such a big battle just to deal with me. If there is any trouble, please notify me as soon as possible. Okay, sir, Jarvis responded, and Tony turned his head to look at Loki with a smile and said, I'll trouble you to take care of the villa during this time, so that no one blows it up. Don't worry, I understand. Rocky nodded. Tony didn't stay any longer, turned around and left the villa, got into a silver supercar, drove away from the villa, and headed towards Manhattan. He was going to see Reed, and by the way, unlock the reward that should be unlocked. Reed was a sick patient before, and he ran out of the hospital in order to escape for his life. After a great battle, the injuries in his body became more and more serious, and he had to rest for a while. This month, Tony has not bothered him, and now an inexplicable enemy appears, although he is not afraid, but if he can add more strength, Tony will not refuse. Maria Hospital. After a lapse of 1 month, Tony stepped into it again, holding a bouquet of tulips in his hand, and he went directly to the intensive care unit on the 3rd floor. As the door was pushed open, in the ward, Reed subconsciously turned his head to look at the door. After seeing Tony, Reed, who was lying on the hospital bed, quickly got up, with a smile on his face and said, Boss, why are you here? Come and see you. I brought you tulips, I hope you like them. Tony smiled, and Reed looked at the tulip in his hand with a wry smile on his face. Boss, I don't like tulips now. What? Tony asked a little strangely. Reed said helplessly, the last time Victor came to see me, he also brought tulips with him. Now I have a shadow of this flower. Hearing this, Tony couldn't help joking. Don't worry, I'm not here to kill you. How's your body? How's your rest? The doctor said that there is nothing serious, and I feel fine, and I can be discharged from the hospital at any time. There is no rush to leave the hospital. You can rest in the hospital for a while, and treat yourself as a vacation. Okay, since you are not in a hurry, boss, then I will rest for a few more days. The two chatted for a while, and the atmosphere in the room seemed very relaxed. By the way, boss, what are you doing here today? Reed asked curiously. It's fine. First, I'm here to visit you to see how your body is recovering. Second, what do you think about my invitation to join the Alliance? Didn't I agree to join? Reed asked suspiciously. Oh, yes, that maybe my memory is wrong. Tony laughed casually, but the smile on the corner of his mouth kept rising at this moment. Ding, successfully recruited new members, Mr. Fantastic, Reed, the rewards have been issued, please check it yourself. After being prompted by the system, Tony's goal was completed, and he chatted with Reed for a few more words, and then Tony got up and left. Leaving the hospital and returning to the car, Tony rubbed his hands excitedly, his eyes full of anticipation. System, lottery draw, Tony said silently in his heart, and suddenly, a turntable appeared in front of his eyes. Looking at the long-lost lottery roulette, Tony felt a touch of kindness. At this moment, he regained the feeling of the first lottery draw, excited and excited. Soon, the pointer on the roulette rotated rapidly, and afterimages appeared in front of Tony's eyes. When it felt almost the same, Tony ordered to stop. Immediately, the speed of the pointer continued to slow down, and finally fixed on a square. Moo! A muffled bleep sounded, and a ox appeared on the roulette wheel, hitting Tony on the head. The moment the two touched, the scalper turned into a spot of light and merged into Tony's body, and Tony's body also changed at this moment. A dull thud echoed in the car, and his heart beat even stronger. Driven by the heart, the blood that was originally flowing slowly was flowing rapidly like a galloping river. As the blood flowed through the whole body, grains of light spots continuously merged into the bone marrow, bones, tendons, and flesh, making his body more solid and the density of his bones greatly increased. 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and after staying in the car for half an hour, the transformation of the body by the cow charm was completely completed. Tony opened his eyes instantly and clenched his fists. A low sonic boom sounded directly inside the car. For a moment, even Tony himself was stunned. He didn't use any force, just a simple movement of his hands, which caused a sonic boom in the air. How much strength is he now? Looking at his hands in surprise, Tony laughed silently again. Up to now, he has acquired quite a few spells, but the one that really changed him was the cow spell. Before fighting people, he used long-range attacks, positioning himself from the perspective of a mage. But from today onwards, he has officially changed his job to become a warrior. After all, fisting to the flesh is a man's romance. While thinking, Tony opened the system panel to check the latest information. Name: Tony Stark. Gender: male. Identity: heir of the Shadow Kingdom. Abilities: horse amulet, dragon amulet, sheep amulet, rabbit amulet, pig amulet, cow amulet, control of shadow ninja, control of shadow thornblade, control of shadow nightbat, control of shadow troll, control of shadow warrior, control of shadow alien. Number of draws: 0. Dark Alliance members: Spider-Man, Winter Soldier, Green Goblin, Dr. Octopus, Mr. Fantastic. Looking at the luxurious panel data, Tony's eyes finally fell on the newly appeared Black Shadow alien group. If you talk about which regiment in the Shadow Corps is the most impressive, it is undoubtedly the Shadow Ninja. But if talking about which corps is the most scalp-numbing, it must be the Shadowy Alien. They are different from other Shadow Corps. They have no hands and feet, only tentacles. Whether they are moving or attacking, they are constantly twisting their bodies like snakes. Humans have a natural sense of resistance to mollusks and multi-legged animals, let alone creatures like Sombra. In particular, the Black Shadow alien in the original book was once taken off the black robe on his head, revealing a ferocious face, which is simply the shadow of childhood. However, now they are all his most loyal subordinates. There is no fear. If it is not for the scruples about the large number of people, Tony would have directly summoned a Black Shadow alien to come out and see. And just when Tony was improving his strength, in the manor where Ying Guonan was at the moment, a strong man in full armor was guarding all over the manor. In the room, Ying Guonan had been tortured beyond human form. If he could still be seen rising and falling on his chest, those who didn't know would think it was a corpse. At this time, a strong man came over holding a screen and squatted in front of Ying Guonan. The screen was dark, but at this moment, words came from the screen. You are so courageous that you dare to pretend to be me. It has been a long time since anyone dared to provoke me like this. The voice on the screen was hoarse and casual, without much emotion, but Ying Guonan, who had been tortured, was already on the verge of collapse, so after hearing this, he quickly knelt on the ground and kowtowed. I'm sorry, sir, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. I didn't know that it was you who pretended to be you. Someone paid me to do it. Really? The hoarse voice continued to sound from the screen. Then you contact him now. I want to see who has such courage. After the words fell, Ying Guonan's expression changed, and he said in horror, Sir, I can't contact him. Is it? That's right, sir, everything I said is the truth. I really can't get in touch with him. Well, if this is the case, then you have no value in living, so kill yourself. The voice on the screen spoke casually, and the words were full of disregard for life. Ying Guonan's expression changed drastically when he heard this, but before he could say anything, a strong man held a dagger and directly slashed across his neck. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.